Jackal Among Snakes. Author, Nemorosus. Chapter 51. Hothouse Flower. Dawnlight fell onto the village of White Edge. Argrave sat with legs dangling off the floor of the carriage while the door remained opened, watching the still visible red moon dip behind the canopy of the forest. His eyes had dark bags beneath them, and he felt generally miserable. Despite that, he knew there was much to do today. Last night, they had laid out the poison-laced deer flesh throughout the lily fields, leaving distinct marks by each to determine which poison had been effective. Today, they would have to check and see which had been consumed and which had been left alone. Argrave wished most to sleep. The feeling overwhelmed, and Argrave pulled out the bronze hand mirror and stared at it to get into the right mindset. Traits: tall, sickly, weak, intelligent, magic of inity, high, insomniac, blessing of supersession, max. Skills: elemental magic, C, blood magic, D, healing magic, C, illusion magic, D, warding magic, D, druidic magic, C, inscription, E, imbuing, E. Argrave had mostly made advancements in druidic magic, specifically, the supplementary spells of Pack Leader, enabling him to give vague commands to the animals he was linked to. Unplanned combat was the #1 cause of death in Heroes of Berenda, and so being able to avoid it with proper scouting was quite important to him. He could already order the birds to move to specific locations, watch over him as he slept, or search for a specific thing. Pack Leader was but a gateway into a very useful subset of druidic spells. It would truly manifest its usefulness when he linked to animals more versatile than pigeons, animals he intended to get to the burnt desert. Argrave turned the hand mirror about in his hand, about to put it away. A voice brought him from his distracted haze. "Do you hate yourself?" Argrave looked up, somewhat surprised. Annalise watched, arms crossed as she stood a fair distance away from Argrave in the carriage. Argrave frowned. "Hate myself? Where's this coming from?" She pointed to his hands. "Whenever you look into that mirror, I see some resentment." "I don't hate myself," Argrave dismissed, taking another glance at the mirror. "Your face, then?" Argrave laughed at that notion. He weighed the mirror in his hand, and then his expression grew pensive. He held the mirror out. "What do you see when you look into this?" Argrave felt anxious even asking the question. He was probing into something he'd been doing his best to avoid thinking about. What exactly had happened to him? He worked tirelessly precisely so he never had to think about it. Annalise hesitated, and then stepped forward and took the mirror. She held it up before her face cautiously. "I see myself," she responded immediately, lowering the mirror as though it was obvious. Argrave stared at the mirror in her hand for a long time. He couldn't quite comprehend what emotion he was feeling at her response. Disappointment, maybe, or some warped sense of affirmation. He examined the emotion, feeling it twisting about in his head and chest. Then he placed it. Isolation. No matter how much more lifelike these people had become, what he knew of this world and where he had come from placed an unbreakable barrier between him and everyone else he spoke to. A game becoming reality was a difficult thing to comprehend in theory. In practice, it was enough to make Argrave lose his mind. So, he didn't accept it. He ignored it and lost himself in studying magic, poor humor, and a steady advance towards what he had done 1,000 times, finish the game. Argrave blinked quickly, trying to bring himself out of his train of thought. "I see," he finally said in response to Annalise's statement. He reached out and took the mirror, stowing it away. "What do you see?" she inquired. "You said it yourself." "Something I resent," Argrave responded simply with an empty smile. "A reminder." "I don't understand," she said, a mix between confusion and concern expressed on her face. "Do you hate your bloodline, the physical traits you inherited?" "They are rather distinct from most humans," she answered, gesturing towards him. Argrave stood from the carriage's floor and shut the door. "We should start heading towards the lily fields, find out what poison we need to make." He walked past her. "You've said you trust both me and Gilliman with your life," she called out. "At the same time, you refuse to trust us with simple knowledge about yourself, your plans, or your struggles." "It's rather vexing." Argrave paused and looked back. "Didn't realize I was so fascinating." "Do I often occupy your thoughts?" "And then you deflect or change the subject when I pry," she pointed out. "Maybe there's a hint in that." "Maybe," Annalise continued, amber eyes unwavering. "But whatever is on your mind wears at you worse and worse. You don't sleep, you have nightmares, you bury yourself in distractions." She trailed off, then continued. "I won't presume your burden. I don't know what it is you're thinking about because you won't share. You might think it's too much for me, for Gilliman too. You might think it's inconsequential and not worth sharing. All I ask is that you consider trying it." Argrave bit his lip, frowning. He shook his head and turned around. "Oh, poor me. I'm a hothouse flower with a wounded soul," Argrave mocked. "Another deflection," she pointed out with a smile that made Argrave oddly sad. "Just think about it," Annalise concluded. Argrave opened his mouth to say more but stopped. He turned his head to the road. "I feel something from my birds." "I think something's coming up the road," he said. "Could you check it out?" Annalise's face grew serious, and she held out her hand while closing her eyes. After a few seconds, a pigeon in the trees flew up into the air, following down the road. Some time passed before Annalise opened her eyes and the matrix in her hand dissipated. She nodded. There's a carriage coming. A well-dressed man is driving, while two knights ride outside. Any symbols on the carriage? Argrave followed up. A banner. Annalise nodded. A red flag with a white sun in the center. That's just heraldry, Argrave said musingly. But why are they coming here? Argrave instinctually looked for Gilliman, but he had sent him out both to collect more game for a larger-scale poisoning and to deal with his vampirism. Be at attention. I'm not sure they'll be friendly, but I have no reason to assume they're hostile, either. Argrave lowered his head, lost in thought. I'm not sure why these people are here. Was the carriage particularly large? Did it have any wagons? The carriage was quite large, but mostly empty from what I saw. There were one wagon trailing behind. Argrave scratched at his chin. From what you describe, it sounds like a tax collector. I was under the impression that Whiteedge scarcely received them. Tax collector? They receive a portion of a village's harvest or other suitable compensation as tax. In return, the feudal lord protects them. This system is the foundation of society in most of Berenda, although it's a bit more complex than that, I'll admit, Argrave explained. We should. He paused, considering how to handle this matter. Go out and meet them. Argrave strode down the road, keeping his eyes fixed on the distant path ahead. Soon enough, what Annalise had scouted with druidic magic came into view. A large wooden carriage driven by two horses, a man holding the reins to the horses with two knights in tow beside him. The occasional flash of red came from the side of the carriage as the banners waved. When the knights took notice of Argrave, they urged their horses forward and rode ahead. Seeing that Argrave was taking no measures to hide himself, their caution did not rise any further than that. Soon enough, the man driving the carriage slowed the horses into a trot. Argrave waited in the road, and Annalise came to stand beside him. You're blocking the road, one of the knights said as the carriage drew closer. Did you think I wasn't aware of that? Argrave asked incredulously. The knights looked to each other after Argrave's undaunted response. Are you part of the village of Whiteedge? One of the knights questioned. The carriage came to a stop, and Argrave was not so far from the two horses bound to the carriage. They neighed and ground their feet against the road. Are you tax collectors from Just? Argrave inquired, ignoring the knight's question. The knight looked to the man driving the carriage. Yes, I'm Gerund, the tax collector assigned to this village. The man confirmed. Many other villages, too, but that's beside the point. Are you a resident of this village? Likely not, judging by your company. He looked to Annalise. I'm a wizard from the Order of the Grey Owl. Argrave identified himself with his badge. I was under the impression tax collectors don't find it worth the time to head to Whiteedge. Why has that changed? Seeing that Argrave was from the Order, the man's demeanor changed, and the knights shifted uneasily. Jorund adjusted in the seat, and then climbed down from the carriage. Once on his feet, he was taken aback by Argrave and Annalise's height. He approached warily. Good wizard, Jorund said cordially. I can't claim to know why it is that I was ordered to do something, merely that I was. In the grand scheme of things, let's skip the preamble. What's the tax? Argrave pressed, gesturing with his hands. You didn't bring a small carriage. One moment, Jorund said, unoffended by Argrave's brusqueness. He reached into his back pocket and pulled free a rolled-up piece of parchment. He unraveled it, and then read quickly. Count Delbrown demands half of this year's harvest, or 50 bushels of wheat, whichever is lower, or suitable compensation. Argrave couldn't exactly say whether 50 bushels was low or high, but he knew that half of the harvest was a ridiculous amount for a place like Whiteedge which didn't have the most fertile lands. That's a bit excessive, don't you think? I thought Just was remaining neutral in the war. What's the need for such a large quantity? Jorund rolled up the paper once more. I'm quite curious why the good wizard is so interested in the tax collection process. Enough to stop the carriage, even. Argrave stared blankly for a moment, debating on what to say. Count Delbrown sent me here to handle an infestation of bugs that the people here are dealing with. I have the villagers helping me with other matters related to that, and the harvest is delayed. I wasn't informed of this, Jorund said with a frown. I'm certain I would have been. That's why I'm curious. Argrave pointed to his chest. I didn't expect to encounter a city official here. You're going to have to turn around until things are dealt with here. Argrave waved his hands away. Wizard, sir, Jorund said, taking a step back. I can't simply turn around and return empty-handed. Indeed, I'm starting to question this entire situation. You meet me so far from the village, you have one of the snow elves in tow. Recent rumor has it they tried to sack Mateth. Quite a dangerous people, he commented, staring at Annalise. Argrave's gaze flitted between the two knights, ensuring that things were not escalating. Eventually, his gaze settled on the tax collector. Seeing that Argrave wasn't speaking, Jorund continued. It isn't that I doubt your identity as a wizard of the Grey Owl. Just has innumerable such badges, and I am quite good at spotting fakes. Jorund sighed. Rumor has it, and this is just rumor, mind you, that the Count's liege sent out orders to have this tax levied. Perhaps that is where this misunderstanding stems from. Bureaucracy is a complicated thing. The Duke of Elbril? Argrave frowned. That's... He paused. Well, I won't make these people resume the harvest. As I mentioned, Count Delbrun ordered me to take care of an infestation of insects here before it spirals out of control. Argrave put a hand on his hip. Suitable compensation, you say? What does that mean? Anything of significant value. I would appraise it, naturally. Argrave nodded. Annalise, could you please go get my logbooks? She looked at him, then nodded and went off to do as he asked. Let's wrap up this matter by saying that the people of White Edge went mining for jewels during this harvest season. I'm sure that you, as a tax collector, can know whether or not these jewels are a suitable compensation. Those were worth a lot of money, Argrave cursed, staring at his logbooks that was a little less colorful. Things are getting out of control. I don't like it. Out of control? Annalise repeated. Argrave shut the box, locking it with its key. He hid the key away in his pocket and then put the box back in the carriage. That was a war tax. Had to be. Half the damned harvest. It's unreasonable. I was counting on just remaining neutral. Argrave grit his teeth. I have to reassess things, deduce what might be happening. For now, we deal with the task at hand. Right. I spent some time watching these insects. I have an idea that may work to expedite things. She looked out into the forest where the lily fields lay beyond. Should we wait for Glimmer? No, it shouldn't. Argrave trailed off. Hold on. I think something's off. What? The lily fields. They're very active. That's what I feel. Argrave touched his forehead, disoriented. I feel a lot of movement, Argrave said decisively. Now that he had experienced scouting something with pack leader, he was much more certain. Do you want me to? No, I'm confident in my assessment. Let's head to the fields, Argrave said decisively. He broke off into a jog. Nothing ever goes right, does it? He thought, fearing the worst. Chapter 52, Prehistoric Fears. Argrave watched atop a hill where the trees ended, fading into the lily fields beyond. In the far distance, he could see the entrance to the lily lurker's cavern. The entrance was shaped like a canoe, and the earth looked recently overturned. Closest to the entrance, the lilies wilted, but as they grew further away, they turned a dark red hue. Argrave knelt down with his left hand pressed against a tree for support as he watched what exactly was occurring. The lily lurkers romped about in the field without order, uprooting and flattening the red and white flowers carelessly. It was difficult to spot reason in their movements, but they did not stray too far from a single point. The lily lurkers were about the size of a human head, though 3 tails on their back end made them seem quite large. Their body was colored much like an orchid mantis. They had 6 long legs that elevated them off the ground, and twinges of pink decorated their joints. Each bore a stinger on its back with an eerie-looking pink bulb on the tip. The other 2 of its 3 tails beside the stinger swayed back and forth as the lily lurkers roamed, vibrating and letting out a harsh noise similar to a rattlesnake. According to in-game lore, Argrave recalled, their tails allowed them to communicate with each other. As it was now, Argrave felt it made them seem much greater in number than they were. The only thing that might have made him more uncomfortable was if they had wings. Jesus, Argrave muttered into his hands as he watched. Scorpions, ants, cicadas. Someone couldn't make up their mind. What was that? Asked Annalise, her eyes closed as she used a druidic spell to scout out what exactly was happening. Above, her pigeon circled their swarm. Nothing, Argrave said louder, not willing to turn his head away from the scene. Those stingers captured his attention. The lily lurkers moved far too fast for him to count them effectively. What do you see? I am unsure. There's one in the center of their movement. Looks unmoving. Dead, right a guess. Argrave ran his hand over his mouth, pondering this. I think one of them must have died to the poison, let out pheromones. It's agitated a bunch of them. These ones are searching for what happened. Ants do that, I read. Pheromones? Don't ask me, Argrave dismissed, lacking both confidence and a sufficient explanation. I can't exactly check my notes. Bugs don't occupy my thoughts, and I wouldn't spend any time reading about them. I prefer to pretend they don't exist. Annalise retracted the spell, and her pigeon flew back to the trees. What should we do? If you'll notice, they're staying near the corpse, Argrave pointed out. Maybe they don't have ants in a snowscape that is Veiden. But if you've ever squished an ant near an anthill, they all freak out. They're searching for danger. Once they're certain there's nothing, they'll stop. The vast majority of Argrave's knowledge on this topic came from nature documentaries. It was dodgy at best, and considering these things weren't even ants, doubly so. So we should wait. Annalise finished Argrave's thought process. Not necessarily. Argrave finally rose to his feet, feeling some burden relieved from his knees. I'm not certain what they're doing, but I can only see this as an opportunity. Imagine them in the trees, or worse yet, in a cavern. Argrave took one step forward. Annalise grabbed at his arm, catching his sleeve. What are you doing? She spoke urgently. If this is how they react for one, imagine how they will react after many deaths. I know, more might come. If that happens, it might actually be for the best. Argrave took a deep breath and then exhaled, laughing lightly. You want some insights into my struggles? Argrave harkened back to their earlier conversation. Feeling queasy right about now. Logically, I know this is the right thing to do. Figuring out how these creatures fight is quite important. Right thing to do? I disagree. Annalise protested, Between the two of us, you cannot believe we could take on those creatures. We don't have the magic for that. Glimmer isn't even here. You underestimate us. And Argrave looked at Annalise. I can connect my magic to Erlebna for 5 minutes, he said simply, pulling his sleeve away from her grip. If things go sour, I can call upon that. For now, I need to determine how these things act when confronted with an enemy. It'll make the spelunking go smoother later if we understand how they hunt. Moreover, I need to learn how to fight things without using potions as a crutch. Argrave turned back. We have to take advantage of these things' limitations. Their simplicity. Use spells like the D-rank, Wind Wall, to block them. I doubt they have the capacity to understand and adapt to magic. Use some of the lightning magic you learned, or fire magic. Even if ice magic is more powerful because you're a Vadaman, it will be too slow-moving to do much. With one roll of his shoulders to gather his confidence, Argrave stepped into the field of white. Far ahead, where the lilies began to turn red, the bugs continued to swarm about. Their movements seemed to coincide with the roiling anxiety in his chest. He felt the wind shift, and he foolishly turned to look at his side. Annalise walked forward alongside him. Argrave didn't need to have her empathic skills to see that she was racked with anxiety just as he was. Seeing her like that, Argrave had a strange moment of clarity. He turned away and clenched his gloved hands tight. I have to become a good leader. The lesson from Mateth isn't only that this world is ever-changing, it's that I alone am not enough to deal with everything. The white fields faded behind them as they came to the red, and beyond that into the wilted flowers. One step after another brought the terrible rattling of the lily lurkers ever closer. Soon enough, the insects turned, their two tails quivering and their bright pink eyes locked on the pair as they approached. Argrave estimated they were about 20. Feeling the distance was sufficient for good accuracy, Argrave stopped and held out both hands, forming the D-rank spell, Writhing Lightning. The first 2 bolts of lightning shot out across the field, fell crackling echoing across the fields. The electricity struck the first bug, and Argrave paid close attention to how the creature reacted. The lightning surged through its body and then spread through the ground and some close to it. The lily lurker spasmed for far longer than Argrave thought it might, and then its 2 quivering tails changed in pitch. This change was soon echoed in the other insects present, and they surged forth with an uncomfortably fast speed. Argrave delivered lightning spells in measured bursts, targeting the ones he already knew were damaged as he retreated backwards in slow, steady steps. Annalise mirrored his actions. The magic was much more effective than he thought it might be, and several of the bugs died as they drew close. As they drew closer, Argrave's anxiety only rose, even though he had a plan ready. Stick close, said Argrave loudly to Annalise over the din of rattling, lacking the time to check if she heard and obeyed. One leapt towards them, and Argrave's heart leapt in unison. He instinctively used Wind Wall, and the creature slammed against it, splaying out ungracefully on the field. Annalise finished it off with 2 quick bolts of lightning. Argrave took a deep breath, keeping an eye on the open cavern far ahead for any movement. As the remainder grew closer, Argrave continued to use lightning magic from behind the cover of his Wind Wall, the spells passing through easily. The bulk of the insects, of which likely half remained, finally came close enough to the 2 of them. Argrave internally reminded himself of the purpose of this fight, to test their reactions. He was uncertain if insects would be afraid of fire as animals were. Once May grew close, Argrave stepped out of the cover of the Wind Wall, and formed the only C-rank attack spell he knew, Wargfire. A great lupine jaw emerged from his hands after the matrix formed. The creatures barely seemed to see the fire until the gaping mouth came shut, catching 2. Argrave fell behind their Wind Wall, spell once more, watching and waiting. The aflame lily lurkers spasmed, their twin tails jerking about while their stinger contracted wildly. It looked as though the insect was stinging itself. But Argrave knew such a notion was ridiculous. Despite the fire, the rest of the insects rushed forward, averse to but not afraid of the flames. The dry, wilted flowers were a natural accelerant, and the flames spread alarmingly quickly. Annalise grabbed Argrave and pulled him away as the flames continued to grow. Argrave devoted all his attention to getting away without dripping. Soon enough, the insects were consumed by the flames which continued to spread in the ring of wilted flowers. Argrave grew worried that he had caused a large fire, but the air was quite humid and the ring of red, unwilted lilies did not catch a flame easily. The flames were short-lived, but the insects caught fire. Once they were a safe distance away, Argrave and Annalise came to a stop and watched. The creatures writhed about, appearing in intense agony, but Argrave could not say for certain that insects even felt pain. He knew one thing, though. That seems to work, Argrave concluded as he watched. Started to get pretty scared, there. Fortunately, these things burn easily enough. Argrave kept an eye on the cavern entrance, looking for flashes of white to emerge and ruin the victory. Annalise said nothing as she caught her breath. See, we learned something. Argrave looked back. I told you it was purposeful. A lot less traumatic to kill insects with fire. You were much too reckless, she finally said. And this knowledge is not especially useful. When a fire is lit in a cave, Those inside most often suffocate, or the rock overhead shifts and falls. I have heard many tales from Vadiamond miners detailing such grisly fates. It's still good knowledge. Argrave shook his head. We're fighting against time. 3 years until Gerektik-Kiet's descent might seem like plenty of leeway, but there's a lot of holes to patch in this dam before the flood comes. I need to be reckless. The fact I even have to get the Amaranthine heart to fix my body is a waste of time. Annalise didn't look satisfied with the answer, but she said nothing more on the matter. We should stay here for a time, make sure that no more come out. Argrave nodded. He stepped into the cavern and looked into it. He saw a patch of loose dirt descend for a bit and then vanish into darkness. Even with the sun overhead, one could not see especially far down. Argrave felt an unpleasant squirming in his guts when he reminded himself he would need to go down there in the future. You mentioned you watched these creatures last night. Had an idea about something? Argrave inquired. Yes, Annalise responded quickly. I watched their habits. These creatures are much like you, in fact. Argrave looked away from the cavern incredulously. What does that mean? Too big, spindly, highly flammable? Annalise crossed her arms. They clean themselves compulsively. Well, that's... Argrave frowned. Good hygiene is important. Even these things have some virtues, it would seem. They often use their mouths to clean themselves, she continued. Each other, too. Argrave nodded slowly, perturbed. I can't recall doing that, unless I have some bizarre sleeping habits I'm unaware of. Might be I have some apologies to make. You're missing the point. We needn't lace food with poison. We need only get some of the poison on them, place it near the entrance, have them walk over it, and then clean themselves. Argrave blinked a few times as what she said sunk in. That is definitely worth trying, he concluded. We still need to check which poison actually worked. They're on the far ends of the field, so they shouldn't be disturbed. Argrave paused, looking at Annalise. Very observant of you. I'm reminded of why I was so willing to bring you along. It may not work, Annalise dismissed with a shake of her head. We'll see, I suppose. I hope it works. This little venture of ours needs to end soon. That tax collector coming to this quaint countryside tells me there's a storm brewing in Just, and I'd like to make it there before it starts. Chapter 53, The Blind Will See. An attendant opened a glass door, bowing humbly. Dune paid the attendant little heed, ducking through the glass structure and entering the greenhouse proper. The place was incredibly beautiful and well kept. The plants were bright and colorful, yet they did not block off the marble pathway winding throughout the entire place. A small brook wound its way around, letting off faint babbling sound. Small bugs no bigger than a coin flew about everywhere, letting out small sparks of multicolored electricity. Dune looked about the place for a moment, expression indiscernible. After fixing his gold-lined black clothes, he waved away the doorman without a word. The attendant bowed once more and shut the glass door. Dune took a deep breath and exhaled, and then walked through the greenhouse. The path was lined with plant life unending. Small trees with red knobby fruits, strange black plants that shone with purple dew, or blue vines wrapped around a fence with fruits that might have passed as grapes. Dune noticed them, but he did not seem awed with them as one might be. He headed towards the center of the greenhouse. He came to a central square with little plant life and plenty of space for movement. A grand fountain stood in the center, spouting water 5 feet in the air. Small streams of water branched off it and ran underneath the marble walkway, eventually forming the brooks that lined the rest of the greenhouse. There was a single table by the fountain. It was pink and fanciful, as were the chairs beside it. 2 people sat. Both were female. One of the 2 people was dressed just the same as the doorman Dune had just left. The other was a beautiful young woman who wore a white and green gown without much adornment. She sat in a strange chair that had handles and 2 wheels on the side. A blanket covered her legs, and her eyes were wrapped in a white cloth. She had the same obsidian-colored hair that Dune did. Dune walked closer quietly with his hands behind his back. As he drew closer, he heard the servant speaking. She was reading from a book. The blind woman sat there quietly, listening intently. Dune waited patiently. Eventually, the servant woman noticed him and stood quickly. Ah, she said, surprised. Princess Ilnor, your brother is here to see you. Ilnor grabbed the table at once, clearly uneasy. Who? It's me, sister, Dune said warmly, stepping forward with his hand on his chest. Dune? She questioned, face brightening. Her expression quickly returned to neutral as though she was hiding her emotions. Yes, Dune confirmed. Give us a moment alone, he said towards the servant, voice considerably colder. At once, my prince, the servant said prudently, walking away from the marble square quickly. Dune stayed standing for a moment, and then slid into the chair. His sister waited there, her blindfolded face not quite in the right direction. Dune picked up the book the servant had left. The Golden Void. He read the title, opening the first page. It's a book about economy, Ilnor answered quickly. Diligent as ever, Dune said, setting down the book. I missed you. How have you been, Ilnor? You don't care. Why do you ask? She waved a hand in dismissal and crossed her arms, refusing to turn her face towards him. I'm a cripple, not a lackwit. Hey, Dune said in protest. Hey. He stood from the chair and moved to her chair, placing his hands gingerly on her arms. Don't be like that, Father was having me do things. You know I'd visit you every day if I could, he said, trying to calm her down. What things? Dealing with the unrest in the capital, communications with the nobles, gathering the troops, preparing the supplies. Indune shook her gently. I promise you I wouldn't ever avoid you. She finally turned her head to look at Indune. You promise? I promise. Indune nodded. She leaned forward and hugged Indune for a few seconds. After she pulled away, she gestured towards the chair. Sit, she repeated insistently. Indune walked back to his chair and sat down, then crossed his arms across the table. At least you come to visit your older sister, Eleanor continued. To all the other snakes, I'm out of sight, out of mind. It's because of that finger-eating queen of fathers. She didn't raise the others right. She pointed to Indune, her finger a little off from his face. Babies are like animals. They're no different than dogs. Somebody has to teach them right from wrong. Indune turned his head away, gazing out at the fountain as it rippled from the waterfalls. Right, he agreed. What have you heard lately? Your half-brother is causing problems, she said flat out. I know. The royal guards say Orion is, no. Foam Spire. Eleanor shook her head. Have you even been paying attention? Indune paused, then leaned in. What are you talking about? The bastard sold it. He got 214 rose gold magic coins for your little poison apple. Donated 50 coins to House Montesai in light of the snow elf invasion. The savior of House Montesai. The Duke is calling him. Rumor has it Argrave's already betrothed to Nicoletto of Montesai. He sold it? Indune repeated, voice low. Where did you hear all of this? When you're blind, the other senses get sharper, Eleanor said simply. What did you think would happen? You killed his mother. That sort of grudge doesn't go away. And then you slap him around? He'll never obey. But father's way of ruling is falling apart, she interrupted. If you were still a little kid, I'd give you a good smack. She shook her head and crossed her legs. You hate father. I hate him. Everybody hates him, but they're afraid of him. All it takes to break that fear is one defiance. His days are numbered. But you defied him, Indune retorted coldly. I did. But I was weak. So he gouged out my eyes and cut off my feet. Margrave Reinhardt is not weak. Indune flinched away when she mentioned what had happened to her so casually. I keep telling you to rein in your impulses. I told you to stop with those weird fetishes of yours, the orphan making, the sadism. Why don't you listen, sis? Indune lowered his head into his hands. I just get angry, and oh, poor you, she mocked. Appreciate that you have the luxury to get angry. That privilege is fading fast, though. Indune mulled on her words for a while. You're right. I'm sorry. An apology. How rich. That'll mend things, surely, she laughed. I said I was sorry, Indune repeated. What more do you want from me? I want you to learn the lesson you need to, she said harshly. My people tell me father beat you because of your handling of Margrave Reinhardt. He wanted to curb your impulsivity. At least, he's right. Indune turned his gaze downwards and refused to speak, biting his lip. Don't pout at me. I can practically hear your sulking, she chastised. Well, stop being a baby. I think now is the time to start breaking free of father's influence. Indune turned to look at her, indignant gaze replaced by a fierce intensity. He took a deep breath, digesting what she said. I'll tell you what I can, but he's sending me to the Duchy of Elbrail, Indune told her. I know. Father has promised them some minor benefits, lands of the defeated, stipends, etc. With Mateth essentially crippled, they're quite close to the north. And the Duke of Elbrail is a coward who doesn't wish to be the bulwark against Vaska. That's common knowledge. What a lot of people don't know, however, is that he's also a henpecked husband. Eleanor reached underneath the table and retrieved a stack of documents. She set it on the table. Obey father, go to Elbrail, and speak to the Duke. Behind the scenes, I'll arrange one of my agents to set up a meeting between you and the Duchess. She and I have been in contact for some time. Indune frowned and took the documents. We need to earn their support, for us, not for the king. House Montesai is the weakest it's been in centuries. Promise the Duchess the city. She'll get her husband in line. Indune set down a paper. Even with 10 men manning it, the walls of Mateth won't fall. The Duchy of Elbrail has no navy, so a siege would be the only way. Eleanor smiled. I know of a mercenary on the inside. I might have to surrender a lot of gold, but she'll do as she's told. What is strong on the outside is often weak on the other. She put a hand to her chin. Another thing. That Argrave, if what I hear is correct, he's planning to use the rebels to gain whatever benefit he can. Maybe even the throne. A jackal. That one, he's only nipped at the heels, but he's opportunistic. I had been ignoring him. That was unwise. Should I nip it in the bud? Indune pressed. No. We missed that chance, and now he's blooming beautifully. C-rank mage, connections with the Snow Elves, a relationship with the Tower Master Castro, special privileges within the Order of the Grey Owl, an alliance with the House Montesai. A very prudent man. I'd like to assess things first. I believe we can yet salvage this into an alliance, though his connections with House Montesai may make such a thing difficult. She turned her head to Indune. No thanks to you, of course. Idiot. I said I was sorry, Indune repeated. I went through a lot of trouble to get Foam Spire, and you spoiled the whole thing by smacking the boy about. She shook her head. "Oh well, what's done is done, and you're still my little brother. Let me make this clear for you. Do not speak to him, do not approach him. You see him on the road, you turn around. I will handle things with him from here, and if he speaks to me, like he'd want to," she said coldly. "Now, unless there was more, you should be off." She waved her hand away. Indune looked back to the fountain. "Eleanor, would you let me read for you?" He picked up the book. Her lips trembled briefly, and she said nothing for a time. "I'll listen," she eventually said. "Do what you want." Indune opened the first page and began reading. "No, not that part. I'm on page 72. Indune obediently flipped to page 72 and resumed reading. The days passed by quickly, and Annalise found herself enjoying the brief foray into this idyllic village. Argrave taught her much of herbology and applications of combat magic. The villagers were uncomfortable with 2 elves in their town, but Annalise did not feel it as much as she normally would because of the company of Guilliman and Argrave. There was companionship in mutual ostracization. After Argrave dealt with the tax collector and the small disturbance of lily lurkers roaming the fields, few other unforeseen events occurred in the days to follow. Guilliman struggled to find significant amount of game in the forests, and so they tried Annalise's idea. After small-scale testing proved to have significantly promising results, the 3 devoted most of their attention to brewing enough poison to cull the numbers of the colony enough to head into the cavern proper. Annalise, Argrave and Guilliman took turns overseeing the brewing process. Some of the villagers grew discontent with their oversight, but Argrave employed various persuasive means to keep them in line: grandiloquent speeches, displays of force, and other such largely effective tactics. On one occasion, he had the 2 of them catch one of the creatures alive and bring it into the village. There were few protests after that incident. As Argrave directed Annalise's progress on the field of magic, she noticed he had a very systematic approach to things. Rather than learn a wide variety of spells so that any situation could be confronted, Argrave much preferred to manage the situations he would find himself in. He taught her mostly electric-based elemental magic, with only a few spells to cover glaring weaknesses or perform tasks electric magic could not. He seldom explained his logic without being pressed for it, but Annalise could find plenty if she dug. Argrave also refused to divulge any more information about himself, a result which Annalise had been expecting. She knew from experience that trying to bridge a gap too quickly might only break the link that binds them, so she kept her pointed inquiries to a minimum. She could not deny an intense curiosity. His knowledge was without question, but after much scrutiny, she was all but certain that its source was not something Argrave was entirely forthright about. Eventually, more and more corpses of the lily lurkers littered the white fields, some of them being carried away by other workers to an insectoid midden of sorts. The activity from the colony began to fade, and what few insects the 3 of them did encounter were often slow and weak, easily dispatched by sword or spell. After around 6 days in Whiteedge, Argrave finally decided things had calmed enough to do a cursory examination of the inside of the cavern. Chapter 54, Amaranthine Heart. Argrave stood at the edge of the cavern of the lily's death. The dirt beneath his feet was loose, and his feet sunk into it like beach sand. Some of the soil was still damp with the poison they had poured over the entrance. He wore a full set of leather gear with long sleeves, but it still did not feel protective enough. "Jesus, everything on me is going to get dirty. I hate this." Argrave waved his hands about as though trying to shake off bugs. "You want to lead?" questioned Guilliman, standing close behind him. As per usual, the elf wore his black armor alone, even with the gaping hole in its torso from the battle at Barden. His great sword, axe, and bow had been set aside, and he carried only his dagger at the ready in his hand. "Why would you even ask that? You can probably smell these things 50 feet away," Argrave said indignantly, only to spot a faintly amused smile on Guilliman's mouth. It was perhaps a fortune the Vadaman helmet's design exposed the mouth, or Argrave might never have noticed he was joking. Argrave prodded the elf's shoulder in irritation. "All right, enough with that." Annalise looked about the fields of white and red, expression unbothered. "The fields are littered with these lily lurkers' bodies. I cannot say for sure that we will proceed unimpeded, but it is certainly the best we can do in such a timely fashion." Annalise crossed her arms as she thought, and then she pointed to Argrave. "If you wish, I might break the druidic link with my pigeon and instead contract with a mole or other such subterranean animal. We can scout out the cavern in great detail before proceeding." "Not worth it. Any creatures still living will move, and Argrave cut himself off from mentioning that he vaguely remembered the layout of the cavern. Annalise had been asking pointed questions. He could not give her any more hints. Although, what am I afraid of her learning? We do this now, most of them will still be in the frenzy that Annalise and I dealt with a few days ago. Because of the rattling tales, they'll be easier to find ahead of time, though they might be bunched up in the cavern. Argrave stepped forward and peered into the cavern. In which case, Guilliman will step back, and Annalise and I will deal with the issue with magic. Argrave took a deep breath and pulled his gloves tighter, dismissing his thoughts before he distracted himself further. "Whatever. Let's start before I talk myself out of this. I'll keep a spell up for light. Don't forget to cover your mouth and nose, Annalise." He pulled up his own cloth before his face, and Annalise did the same. Guilliman had no such covering. Being a vampire, Glimmen did not need to breathe to survive, nor would he actually suffer if he inhaled any sort of noxious fumes. Habits built up over centuries were difficult to break, though, and Argrave knew Glimmen made a conscious effort to breathe to keep in touch with the time he had been alive. Glimmen stepped ahead of Argrave without hesitation. He found himself envying his elven companion's confidence, but Argrave only grit his teeth and followed close behind, ducking into the fortunately spacious entrance. To Argrave's great displeasure, the mushiness of the soil only grew worse as they lowered further beneath the earth, and light quickly faded before Argrave cast a simple fire spell to replace it. Distant rattling echoed out from the cavern as the sounds of the outside faded. Their party stepped around innumerable insect corpses as they trudged deeper into the underground. The light of Argrave's magic reflected off the white exoskeletons brilliantly, and so they were not especially difficult to avoid, but the sheer number of them made Argrave uneasy. Most of the path was wide enough for them to pass through easily, but at times they had to duck or slide to avoid a low ceiling. The air was dank, and Argrave could feel his skin sticking to his leather clothes. He was undecided if it was sweat or the moisture in the air. The echoing rattling grew louder with each step deeper, making Argrave's blood pump faster as his nervousness grew. Then, when the noise was unbearably loud, Glimmen would lunge forward and stab before Argrave could even spot the danger. This game of anxiety repeated what seemed to be indefinitely, a constant rise and fall of nerves. As the three of them proceeded lower like this, the smell grew very unpleasant even with a mask over their faces. It was a combination of the poison that they had been brewing and the innumerable other undoubtedly foul things in the cavern, corpses both of insects and eaten animals, the lily lurker's waste, and general stale air. At times, the path would branch, and Argrave would instruct Glimmen on which direction to proceed. Though Glimmen shot Argrave a curious look, he obeyed without question. Argrave moved slowly to avoid twisting his ankle in the unsteady ground. "What is that light?" Annalise asked, and Argrave jumped a little, bumping his head against a rock protruding from the ceiling. Argrave took a deep breath and exhaled. "Touch me or something before you talk." He paused. "Now, what are you talking about?" "On the ceiling," she pointed. "A faint purple trail of light, so faint I thought it was but a trick of the mind." "Oh." Argrave nodded knowingly. He looked up, and just as she said, there was a faint line of purple on the rocks above. "It's a vein of the Amaranthine heart. It absorbs magic by spreading veins across surfaces, seeking out anything alive and stationary, namely, the lily field. And those veins are what is making those lilies change colors the way they are, if I am correct in assuming so." "Yeah, you're right, but let's cut the chatter," Argrave said quietly. Glimmen paused ahead, and then looked back. The light from Argrave's spell illuminated the elf's face, and Glimmen's helmet cast a shadow over his jaw. Argrave could clearly see his fangs in the dark, and it brought back some unpleasant memories for a moment. "Ground ahead is stone carved, looks like," Glimmen said. Argrave dabbed his forehead with the back of his gloved hand, feeling some sweat. "Phew. All right, we're near where we need to be. Just keep going." Glimmen nodded and turned back. Argrave felt faintly tired, but he said nothing as he readjusted the cloth over his face and followed along. He felt a strong sense of relief as his feet hit something more solid than the dirt they'd been treading on before. Far ahead, Argrave's spell illuminated a wall of taupe stone with a large hole marring its carved surface. The elven vampire stopped at the hole, carefully looking around before entering inside. Argrave tried to follow, but Glimmen stopped him. "Hear that?" he questioned. Argrave listened. "I just hear that damned rattling," he said after some time. "But only from behind, not a single one ahead." "Is this out of your expectations?" Argrave listened a bit more intently this time, realizing Glimmen was right. He looked back into the cavern. "Well, yes. Yes it is. You don't hear a thing ahead?" "Dripping water, strange pulses, sounds like electricity. Almost no rattling, though," Glimmen summarized. "I see insect corpses ahead, but none living." "Who?" Argrave raised a hand to his mouth, adjusting the cloth. "The electricity is just the Amaranthine heart's veins. It means we're getting closer. The dripping. Usual cave ambience, I guess. But no rattling." Argrave tried to think of what it could mean. He shook his head and pointed forward. "Just stay extra cautious, keep moving as I direct you." "We can't stop here." Glimmen nodded and turned without hesitation, his advance a little slower than before as per Argrave's directions. Argrave and Annalise passed the wall's threshold and entered into the ruins proper. The first room was large and spacious, held up by 4 pillars in each corner of the room. The floor was the same smooth taupe stone as could be seen on the walls. Dead magic lamps hung from the pillars and walls. Sophisticated glass alchemical equipment was strewn about everywhere, most of it broken or half broken. The tables were made of stone and had withstood time, but the wooden chairs were broken or badly rotted. The new inhabitants, the lily lurkers, had very clearly made this place their home. Bones and waste occupied much of the room, alongside their corpses and mounds of dirt tracked in from the tunnels. The smell became stranger here, musky and sweet simultaneously. Argrave looked at the ceiling's corners in paranoia but found nothing lurking there. Argrave swallowed and followed behind Glimmen, magic light swirling about his head. Annalise cast her own spell and gave Argrave some space now that they were not in such tight spaces. Glimmin walked to the only exit of the room and walked through. A hallway that went left or right waited. Left, Argrave said confidently. His voice echoed uncomfortably well. Follow the left's wall until there's a stairway down. The three of them walked down the hallways. Soon, the noise of the rattling behind them faded, and Argrave foremost heard the clanking of Gilliman's steel armor. They passed by innumerable rooms, and Annalise all but stuck her head in each door, brimming with curiosity. When she paused at one door, falling behind the two of them, Argrave stopped and sighed. This place is an old alchemical laboratory. While I can tell you all about it later, at present, I don't need you wandering off. Annalise turned from the room, then back. Eventually, she turned and hastened her steps, catching up quickly. So many rooms of tools. This place looks like it was for mass production, Annalise pressed. Argrave bit his lip, debating whether or not to answer at all. Eventually, he whispered back, this civilization was studying a method to materialize magic, and from what you've told me, this Amaranthine heart is their success. It extracts life and turns it into liquid mana. So why is it still here? What happened to this civilization? The people are gone, stolen from us by time and other thieves. Why else would it be a ruin? Argrave returned. They died, and eventually this place was forgotten. I don't know how or why. As for your other question, the Amaranthine heart was not ever recognized as a success. It took thousands of years for its potential to manifest. After all, her curiosity somewhat sated, Annalise followed behind without more questions, though her gaze did wander to the open doorways. They passed by some rooms that had collapsed, entirely blocked off. The majority of the rooms were simple work areas, and Argrave knew they were all mostly like that. Glimmin continued to follow the leftward wall when they came to an intersection just as Argrave had directed. Far ahead, a single stairway as wide as the hallway waited. The purple veins of the Amaranthine heart were especially concentrated in this area, surging on the walls and the ceiling and the floor. Had they been actual veins, the sight may have been unpleasant. As it was, Argrave found it rather serene. Glimmin walked cautiously to the stairs and stood before them, eyeing the purple lights. He looked back to the two of them, confirming that these things were harmless. After Argrave gave one nod, Glimmin proceeded down the stairs. Argrave's spell went out, and he cast another quickly. The magic made some of the veins twist and move in response, and the two of them were startled. Argrave was unaffected, and quickly set the two of them back down the stairs. The trio walked down the first set of stairs, turned, and continued down to the second. A long hallway waited for them at the bottom, lined with pulsing purple lines. It was a little more intense than it had been before, enough to light up the hallway. Even Argrave saw lily lurker corpses, but none of the insects themselves. B2F, the archives. No noises, Glimmin? Argrave questioned. When the vampire shook his head, Argrave took a deep breath and directed him forward. Why do its veins travel along the hallways? Why not move up the stone? Annalise questioned. It seeks out life. In other terms, it only follows the path the lily lurkers take to reach the surface. We follow the light, it'll take us right to the heart, Argrave remarked, eyes locked on the trail of purple. So, I think you can find the way, Gilliman. If the veins follow the creature's path, yeah, we might find them. Argrave nodded. I don't know what's going on. We can only be careful. Gilliman nodded, but Argrave thought he spotted some hesitation. The elf's steps were unfaltering, though, and he carried on down the hallway. Argrave felt a rising tension in his chest. Even he could hear the static noise coming from the veins around them. It sounded like the buzzing noise one might hear if they were close to a power line. They went down another flight of stairs, and Argrave forced Gilliman to slow further and walk quietly. Though he feared the buzzing noise of the nearby veins might be masking a rattling, Argrave could still hear the faint ambience of other things in the ruins. The corpses grew fewer and fewer. Eventually, a room practically bursting with purple light waited ahead, and the three of them proceeded unimpeded. Gilliman entered the room and looked about. Argrave was briefly distracted by the beauty of the room. Each table, each wall, all of the ceiling and floor, had been consumed by dancing purple lights. It was like traveling through a galaxy of purple stars at light speed. Argrave briefly held his hand to the wall, overcome by dizziness. All of it came from a rather unremarkable cabinet in the corner of the room. Its wood mostly rotted over the centuries. There were many glass bottles lined up on a table. Argrave walked, scanning the largest bottles for damages or contents. Finding one empty and undamaged, he took it. Argrave took many tentative steps forward and reached out, opening up the cabinet. There, a stone no bigger than a fist waited alongside various other unremarkable objects. Its shape was rough and unrefined, though it did vaguely resemble a heart. It glowed like the veins dancing about the room. Argrave reached out, breathing quick. He took it and pulled. The veins moved with it, strained, like pulling on a wired plug attached to a wall. With a soundless snap, the veins started to break away. They all faded into nothingness, fading from the edge like a spark traveling along a fuse. Argrave placed the stone on the bottle's top. It was just barely big enough not to fall in. As the heart's glow faded, a black liquid started to drip out. The drip soon turned into a steady stream as though someone was wringing the stone. When the bottle was half full, the stream slowed, and once it ceased altogether, the last light on the Amaranthine heart died out. Argrave retrieved a cloth, wrapped the heart, and then stowed it in a bag in his satchel. With a deep sigh, Argrave turned around to watch the purple lights fade out of the room. He stopped quickly. Neither Annalise nor Gilliman were in the room. Argrave took a slow step forward, listening carefully. Eventually, he peeked his head out into the hall. When he saw the two of them standing and looking into a room, some of his tension was relieved. But then he saw Annalise shaking. Even Gilliman was rattled. Argrave took cautious steps out into the hallway, and then peered into the room they were looking at. At first, Argrave thought the room was collapsed. As his brain made sense of it, he realized what he saw seeing was too white. The light reflected brilliantly off it, like polished marble. Twinges of pink decorated it at points. Then it set in. Argrave stared at a great mass of lily lurkers. There must have been 100, if not 1,000. He thought they were dead at first, but the faintest twitch of a tail told him he was wrong. Chapter 55. Hibernation. Staring at the great horde of immobile lily lurkers, Argrave first froze as his two companions did. His rationality took over, though, and he reached out to grab both of their hands. Gilliman held a dagger, so Argrave settled for his wrist. Just back away slowly, Argrave whispered. They haven't moved yet. No logical reason they will now, unless we do something dramatic. His calm words brought them out of their stupor, and both backed away further down the hall, led by Argrave. The mass of white and pink insects faded into darkness as the light of the spell illuminating them grew further away. The veins of the Amaranthine heart slowly faded in the hallway behind them as they fizzled away. Once they were a comfortable distance away, Argrave released his grip. Argrave let out a breath of relief. Damn, forgot that bottle. That's... Argrave cast glances towards the darkness where he knew the room still was. I feel like we still need some distance. Let's go to the archives once more. Both nodded without protest, and Argrave took the lead this time. He took the party to the stairs without issue, walking up 2 steps at a time. Once they reached the archives again, Argrave led them into a room off to the side. He took off his satchel and placed it atop a table, leaning over it. His body was racked with sweat. The other walked in shortly after, sitting to rest. Gilliman, Argrave called, not bothering to turn to look at him. Were they all alive? Could you tell? They looked dormant, a low rasp answered. Barely any heat. Slow moving. Alive, yes, but weakened. Some form of hibernation, probably. They seemed centralized around something. Thought it might be that Amaranthine heart you spoke of. Got worried. Argrave patted the satchel bag. No. I got the heart, Argrave said. So your task is finished. We can leave, Annalise said. Argrave slowly turned around and leaned on the stone table he'd placed his satchel bag on. Yeah, I got what I needed. We can leave, he said quietly. Those words hung in the air for a bit. Everyone was clearly relieved, barring Argrave, who had a grim look about him. A lot more than I expected to see. We had a little bug boulder, Argrave said. I guess, in response to danger. Or maybe to the end of autumn, the cold, you know. They all gathered around the queen of the colony. Then, come spring, they'll become active again. By then, the poison will have soaked into the soil or evaporated or... Argrave trailed off. Then they'll be back at the surface. No real damage done. Argrave could not help but think back to the time he'd been speaking to Driz regarding Mateth's fate. The patriarch offered him an easy out then, and the same thing came before him now. Leave the village, claim the job was done, and with everything he needed in his pocket. Another settlement instead of a victory. Argrave, Gilliman said firmly. You saw how many of them there were. We have what we came here for. No need to risk ourselves uselessly for some field of flowers. You said yourself that these creatures would, at most, displace the villagers of White Edge, Annalise insisted, trying to persuade Argrave. Think about this. Anything needed to kill such a large number of the creatures would be absolutely devastating. Widespread fire might warp the stone and cause the place to collapse, dangerous both to the surface and to us. A collapse alone would make all of the ground above come with it. The entire village of White Edge might sink. But the problem exists, and it'll keep existing. These things will expand, maybe even migrate, in search of food. Perhaps next time, it won't be such a lightly populated area. We're here. We have a chance now. Argrave shook his head. Please don't even consider this, Annalise said insistently. How will you do this? Perhaps the same way you dealt with those druids. Gilliman told me tales of that explosive gas you used on them. Or perhaps more poisons. Even if we are in an ancient alchemy lab, ingredients. Annalise trailed off. Why are you smiling? Argrave looked over. Relax. You make it sound like I have a complete extermination in mind. Argrave kicked off the table he was leaning on. Cut off a snake's head. It still dies. It might writhe a bit, but it will. We kill the last member of the Lily Lurker royal family, the queen, and the colony will fall apart. Argrave paced about the room, waving his hands as he explained. We tell the people of White Edge what transpired, teach them how to brew that poison for the next seasons. Problem solved. These things might be gathered around the queen, you said so yourself. It will be impossible to do as you say without triggering these creatures, Gilliman rebutted. You said you barely felt any heat from them? Argrave pointed. When Gilliman nodded, His grin widened. It stands to reason their dormant state is only intensified by cold. That's just the nature of metabolism and hibernation. Annalise and I use some low-level ice magic on the bugs sparingly to send them deeper into sleep. We locate the queen, and then we dispatch it quickly. Then they all go into a frenzy as we saw on the surface. Annalise countered. Argrave nodded. Might be. But this state that these creatures are in, if what I know of other animals is true, dormancy isn't something they can just drop into and out of immediately. They have to regain their faculties, turn their body back on. A lot of speculation, Annalise said. Hey, Argrave raised both his hands. We'll just test this out. If this doesn't work, I'll call it quits. I think this is stupid, Glimmer said simply. Worst case scenario, we all die, Argrave said cheerily as he threw on his satchel once again. Probably bound to happen eventually. Anyway, you're great at raising morale, Annalise shot back. One of my myriad talents, Argrave agreed with the elf's sarcasm. He walked to the entrance, then stopped and turned on his heel. Listen. If both of you wish to bravely run away, I'll concede. This is, unfortunately, a democracy. I bring you with me because I value your opinions. Bring us, like we're pets, Glimmer commented to Annalise. You are his mule, she said back after mulling her response over. Argrave shook his head. Do you have a better word for me? Lead, or guide, or escort, perhaps? Lead works, Glimmer nodded, and Annalise shortly after agreed. He gestured with his dagger to the hall beyond. So lead on, foolish leader. I'll follow. Argrave clicked his tongue a few times, then turned around and proceeded into the halls. All of the veins of the Amaranthine heart had faded, but the dark halls seemed a little less eerie after their banter. Argrave confronted a very unpleasant reality when returning to the site where the lily lurkers rested dormant. Walking the walk was much more difficult than talking the talk. Staring up at the mound of lily lurkers, his bravado threatened to die on the vine. At the very least, his presence confirmed they were not actively moving. He heard none of the rattling. Indeed, it was difficult to tell they were even alive. Glimmer spoke up from just behind Argrave. Tell me again that plan of yours. The elven vampire whispered. They're practically stacked atop each other. Not practically, literally, I think, Argrave whispered back. Maybe you could go get your bow? He suggested. Foolish. I cannot even see this queen you speak of. Right. Well, first thing. Argrave walked away from the mass of lily lurkers, retrieving the bottle half full of black liquid in the room the Amaranthine heart had once been. The black liquid was the pure mana collected by the Amaranthine heart. The liquid was somewhat dense, but none of it stuck to the glass. Argrave wiped clean the bottle's neck with a cloth from his satchel, then raised it to his lips. He swallowed only a tiny portion, but it made him grimace terribly. He coughed. Yug tastes like acid. Argrave rubbed his chest as he felt the liquid flow down. He felt a strange refreshing feeling spread across his body, and then some of his diminished magic returned. Who? He breathed, shaking his head. That feels nice. Annalise reached forward, silently asking for the bottle. Argrave handed it over. Don't drink too much. It'll kill you in a violent explosion of magic. Nevlusp.com. She examined the liquid, holding it up near the magic spell that whirled about her head and lit her surroundings. She took a drink, recoiling at the taste just as Argrave had. After a few moments, shock registered on her face. It really is pure magic. She stepped towards Argrave, holding the bottle up. Argrave, this is something the world has never seen before. Nothing the Vadaimon have ever achieved in alchemy comes near this single bottle. Don't get any ideas, now. Argrave took it back from her. We'll be using the heart to make plenty later. Truly? She questioned. I am unsure about you becoming black-blooded, as you mentioned some time ago. But this Amaranthine heart alone makes the trip worth it. Told you to have faith in me. Argrave walked back out into the hallway, stuffing a cloth into the neck of the bottle as a makeshift cork. He set the bottle down, for it was too large to fit inside of his satchel. Now, let's make use of that faith in dealing with the queen. He came to stand before the mound of lily lurkers. Despite their activities in the other room, the things remained immobile. Argrave rubbed his thumb against his palm. The problem was so massive it was difficult to find a point to begin. Argrave's companions, even the ever-confident Guilliman, seemed to have similar dilemmas. Suppose I should do the test run. It is my idea, after all, Argrave said awkwardly. The two stared at him without response, so he swallowed his saliva and stepped forward. His hand awkwardly hovered above the closest insect's pinkish eyes. With his gaze fixed on that terrible stinger on its backside, a simple, one-dimensional spell matrix materialized in front of his hands. A mist of cold air began to emanate outward. There was no immediate reaction to the cold. Argrave's heart pumped quickly, but he waited as the air before him grew colder and colder. Eventually, even the faintest twitching ceased. Argrave kept up the spell a while yet. When he began to see frost on its body, he stopped. Argrave bit his lip then reached out, grabbing the lily lurker. Its exoskeleton was quite hard. Argrave lifted it, and it showed no response. He took a few steps back, watching its stinger for any movement. Once he was a fair distance away from the rest of them, he set it down gently, scanning the horde beyond it. He saw no movement. Argrave turned to Annalise and Guilliman. spreading his arms wide. "Would you look at that?" Argrave whispered. "Stupid, you called my plan." Glimmer shook his head. "That was but one test. Enough for me, I think." "Let's do it, then." Argrave pointed to the both of them. "Annalise, help me." "I hope you know the E-rank spell, Ice Mist. It's best suited for this situation." "Gilliman, your job is to monitor and move the insects. We chill. You should also make sure the rest of them don't start moving about." Both of them did not seem especially excited about Argrave's plan, but neither protested all the same. Argrave and Annalise used the same spell to exacerbate the creature's dormancy, and then Gilliman hauled them away a fair distance, keeping an eye to be sure neither the ones in the chamber or the ones moved aside posed any threat to them. Their progress was surprising to Argrave. They dug at the great mound of lily lurkers like it was a pile of debris and not a mound of dangerous, man-eating insects. Once they made a fair bit of progress in, Argrave's spell better illuminated the center. After studying it for a time, he pulled aside Annalise. Argrave pointed out, "There's a big, bulbous abdomen, I think it's called, there. A lot bigger than any of the other lily lurkers we see." He moved his finger slightly. "And there, a head, a lot larger than any others." "Your queen?" Annalise inquired. "Yes." Argrave whispered back, trailing off. "Well, no, not my queen, but the queen." "Don't get it twisted." He looked at Annalise, brain working quickly. "Then, I think it's my time." Argrave stepped into the path they'd carved, walking past the uneasy Annalise. He held his hand out, taking careful aim at what he recognized now as the queen for certain. He conjured blood magic for the second time in his life, using the same D-rank spell as the first time. Pierce! A pencil-thin red bolt shot out from the conjured matrix, and with it came a burst of pain from Argrave's wrist. The shot narrowly missed what Argrave thought was the queen's head, instead striking one of the nearby insects. Argrave grit his teeth and raised his hand a second time, using the same spell. It struck home this time, and the insect head exploded into white viscera. With that death, there was a shift in the room. The largely immobile mound seemed much more alive, stirring as if that noise had triggered a natural instinct. It was like something slowly coming to life. Nothing moved quickly, but it was clearly waking up. The pain in his arm was unbearable and Argrave pulled off his glove, staring at his hand. Cracks leaking blood marred much of his skin. Glimmer grabbed Argrave's shoulder, pulling him from his stupor. "Time to move," the elf said loudly. Chapter 56, Escape. After Gilliman's direction to move, it did not take further encouragement for Argrave to turn and rush down the hallway. The lack of light made him mind his steps, and he ensured Annalise was moving ahead before coming to a jog himself. Argrave's arm felt hot, both from the surging pain and the warm blood dripping down it. Behind, the slow rattling of the waking lily lurkers escalated into a terrifying sound that consumed the entire ruin. It sounded like metal fragments banging around in a box. The adrenaline narrowed Argrave's focus down only to his escape. Argrave remembered to grab the big bottle of black liquid mana, and fortunately did so without issue. Annalise slowed with a spell matrix whirling about in her hand. A larger light spell shot out ahead, better illuminating the path. Argrave greatly appreciated it, but he did not have time to give thanks. Far ahead, Glimmer kicked aside one of the returning lily lurkers into an open room. As the three of them finally made it to the stairs, Argrave was already out of breath and struggling to keep his grip on the large bottle of pure magic. He spared a brief glance back to a great horde of the creatures surging along the hallway feverishly. Their movements were much more sluggish than Argrave had seen on the surface, but they were still chasing, though perhaps that was not the right word. Rather than a pursuit, their actions seemed to be frenzied. Without pausing to rest, Argrave turned his head back to the path ahead and took the stairs two at a time. He made it to the end of the first set, and though greatly exhausted, he turned sharply and took the next. Once at the top of those, his breaths were shallow and rapid, and his thighs screamed at him. His foot brushed against the corpse of a white insect, and he stumbled. Argrave kept his footing but the bottle threatened to fall from his grip, and he raised his other hand to correct it. The blood made it slip from his grasp, and Argrave desperately fell with it to shield it from breaking. He collapsed, huffing, and his makeshift mask slid off. The bottle remained intact, though, and he tried to scramble up. "Idiot," Glimmer cursed at him, stepping back and seizing the bottle from him. After sheathing his dagger, he grabbed Argrave's shoulder and hoisted him to his feet. The two set off once more with Argrave being all but carried by the elven vampire. His grip was no weaker than a vice. Annalise cast yet another spell and a ball of light shot out across the hall, moving slowly and illuminating this floor just as it had the previous. They moved beneath it, its glow following them like a spotlight. "Just had to be the hero," Glimmer said. He slowed his steps, eventually halting. "There are many ahead, at least 50 bunched up. We'll take a different path." "No," Argrave stopped him, catching his breath. "I'll deal with them." Argrave tried to free himself but found Glimmer's grip unbreakable. "You?" Glimmer asked disbelievingly. "Just as I did the druids." "Watch the rear for a moment." Argrave finally managed to break free and stepped forward, following the light as it advanced. The din of the lily lurkers behind them made those ahead barely audible, but Argrave barely began to hear it before he saw May moving forth, frenzied just as those behind them. "What are you?" "Wait." Annalise called out, but she was too far from Argrave to stop him from proceeding. Argrave triggered the blessing of supersession, and at once, the small lake of magic within him was replaced by a boundless sea. That feeling of overwhelming power from within completely hid his fatigue from his own psyche. In seconds, the hallway ahead became a show of light. Argrave first used warg fire, many times in quick succession. The fiery maws set upon his foe like a pack of wolves, their imitative mouths clamping shut and dicing the creatures in half and setting those near aflame. For a brief moment, Argrave felt he was astride 1,000 hellhounds, tearing his foes asunder. The noise of the flame overtook that of the rattling for a brief moment. Next, Argrave spawned a flurry of D-rank wind spells, cutting and dicing and casting the flames every which direction. The black smoke from their burning bodies dissipated in the winds, cast about harmlessly everywhere. When Argrave finally paused, watching, the hallway before them had become a mess of burnt and twitching parts, blackened stone, and fading flames. Argrave turned back. The frenzied bugs behind them had not yet come near his two companions. "Come," he said, gesturing. Annalise's face was written in shock and awe, but Argrave's words brought her from her stupor. Glimmin rushed up, ushering the both of them forward, and Argrave did not protest as he turned and followed behind. Though he'd regained his breath somewhat, the hasty retreat once again labored his breathing. When they made it to the final set of stairs before the cavern's exit, Glimmin simply turned to Argrave and gestured. "What?" Argrave questioned weakly after a shallow breath. "This'll be easiest." Glimmin stepped forward and wrapped his arm around his torso, hoisting him over his shoulder before Argrave could even react. Argrave opened his mouth to protest, but Glimmin began moving up the stairs and Argrave's open mouth slammed shut. His teeth clacked together loudly and some pain ignited on the tip of his tongue. Tasting blood the whole way, Argrave was ungracefully carried over Glimmin's shoulder up the stairs. The elf's steel armor poked and prodded at his ribs. At the top, Argrave was deposited with as little warning as the initial pickup. He stumbled ungracefully. With little time for admonishment, Argrave could only cast an indignant glance at Glimmin before heading down the hallway. Annalise held her arm up and out, a spell matrix forming, probably in preparation for another spell to light the path. Spotting something on the walls that was white and mobile, Argrave called out, "Annalise." His words came out as the lily lurker's stinger was already in motion. It moved lightning fast, though Argrave clearly saw it stake her arm. She staggered away, holding her arm and letting out a hiss of pain. Glimmin kicked the wall, stomping the creature flat with his plate boots. After, he walked beside her, checking the injury. Argrave bit his lip, somewhat panicked. To keep his calm, he considered his options. The blessing of supersession had yet to wear off, and Argrave knew their retreat might be slowed on account of the lily lurker's paralytic poison. Recognizing these variables, Argrave stepped to the top of the stairs, looking down. "You two, get going for the surface. Don't argue," Argrave said loudly, not looking to be sure his orders were followed. The lily lurkers moved up the stairs in bulk, though their numbers had been greatly thinned by their disorderly and frenzied pursuit. Argrave did not hesitate for a second before sending out yet more warg fires. The lupine jaws of flame battered at the stairs, the walls, and the ceilings, turning the brown stone a harsh black. The creatures popped and writhed as they burned, the sound of their rattling tails slowly fading in way of the all-consuming roar of fire. The air Argrave was breathing was soon replaced by smoke, and Argrave stopped to cough. Delivering only a few more spells for good measure, he turned and ran. Annalise and Glimmin were nowhere to be seen, but Argrave saw a distant light. He pursued it, and as he did so, the blessing of supersession wore off. Argrave kept moving, and the sounds of fire and rattling slowly became distant. He dared a glance behind and saw no pursuers. As he took a deep breath and breathed a sigh of relief, he felt the ground shake. After, a distant noise reached Argrave's ears. It was rattling, but a different kind, stone against stone. Deciding that he really had no time to rest, Argrave resumed his retreat. He finally spotted the room that they had initially entered and came to it. There, Glimmin waited. Annalise slumped over on his shoulder. After seeing Argrave, he moved for the hole in the wall, exiting back into the cavern. Argrave soon caught up to the two of them. "Annalise," Argrave began despairingly, not knowing what to ask. "Quiet, unless you wish for this to happen again," Glimmin silenced. "Take your bottle, follow behind in silence." "I need to hear." Argrave nodded, and they proceeded up the cavern much slower than they had entered. Annalise was sweating badly and breathing heavily. Her movements were stiff, and only grew stiffer as they proceeded. Argrave helped where he could, but Glimmin did the bulk of things. Just as their entry had been, they were mostly unbothered by the lily lurkers in their exit of the cavern. Argrave could not help but feel a strong sense of guilt and uselessness watching Glimmin forge ahead, both dealing with the errant lily lurkers and supporting Annalise. He tried to occupy his mind with what to do once they got out. Though it felt like an eternity, they did eventually reach the surface. Argrave squinted his eyes at the dusk sunlight when they first re-emerged into the familiar field of lilies. He looked around briefly, then turned to Glimmin. "We have to go back to the village. We definitely have what I need to make an antidote. It should work quickly," Argrave said decisively. "Right." He started moving, but Annalise was nearly being dragged along. He pointed to her other side. Support her. Argrave rushed to get underneath her shoulder just as Guilliman was, adjusting his satchel and the bottle he held. Eventually, they both hoisted her up, heading back towards the village. Argrave sat on a chair beside Annalise's bed, biting his lip in silence. Though she was still sweating a great deal, Argrave had healed the wound caused by the stinger and administered an antidote for paralytic poisons. There was a great uncertainty to the whole thing, and it ate at Argrave's gut. He knew that this antidote worked in Heroes of Berenda. But this was reality, and he was uncertain if things could be so simple as they were in the game. You should sleep, Guilliman advised, placing his hand on Argrave's shoulder. She is recovering. We can only wait. Argrave looked around. They were in a quaint wooden house which was poorly illuminated by moonlight. One of the villagers had graciously donated the use of their residence after learning of Annalise's injury. Argrave, though, found it impossible to sleep. Argrave looked up at Guilliman. The elven vampire had taken off his helmet. He looked as unshaken as usual. Every single time I try to do something beyond my means, someone around me gets hurt. Never me, Argrave remarked idly. What of your arm? Argrave lifted up his hand. The cracks that had been leaking blood were already healed by magic. My own doing. He eventually dismissed. Guilliman picked up a chair in the house and set it down quietly. Best get used to it. Hurting myself? Argrave questioned. No, Guilliman snorted, sitting down. Watching others get hurt because of your choices. He pulled up his flask and took a long drink. You want to rally people, lead them against he who would judge the gods? Then may more are going to get hurt on your watch. Guilliman pointed at Argrave with his pinky, the rest of his fingers wrapped around the big flask. Accept it. Come to terms with the guilt. Feeling something because of it doesn't make you weak. It's a reminder you're still mortal. Guilliman leaned in. The people that don't feel guilt because of the consequences of their choices. From what I understand, your father is one such man. They call them tyrants. Hearing King Felipe called his father was strangely agitating, and Argrave turned away from Guilliman's white-eyed gaze. Father, huh? He mulled over the word for a bit, then turned back to Guilliman. He did not wish to think of the matter further, so he diverted the topic back to Guilliman. Do you ever see me as a son? Guilliman frowned. Generally, or, well, you've got a kid at home, but you haven't seen him in a long while. Argrave pointed to Guilliman. Now you're sitting here, giving me life advice. I'm a bit older, granted, but I'm pretty tall and pale and... He trailed off, noticing Guilliman's look. The elven vampire stared coldly for a long while. Argrave awkwardly scratched the back of his head, unsure of what further to say. After what seemed like an eternity, Guilliman opened his mouth and said only, you should sleep. Chapter 57, The City of Magic. Annalise blinked open her eyes, dispelling the morning haze over them. For a brief moment, she entirely forgot what they had experienced yesterday, but when she moved her arm she felt a brief twinge of numbness. She was covered in sweat, and her head throbbed. She shifted her head, looking about where she was. A cold and damp washcloth fell from her forehead. Annalise first spotted Argrave in his freshly cleaned black leather clothing. He sat just beside her in a chair, reading a spellbook. The sight made her smile slightly until she noticed the dark bags beneath his eye. Evidently he saw or heard her head moving about, because his gaze shifted over to her. Startled, he closed the book at once, leaning forward. Hey, Annalise, you're up. That's good, that's good. He said rapidly. How do you feel? Any numbness? I gave you something I thought would work, but I'm not entirely sure. I feel much better, she said, some fatigue still leaking into her tone. Did you watch me all night? Argrave frowned. I just sat here reading and occasionally trying to help out with the fever, he said dismissively. I got you into this mess. Least I could do is take care of the aftermath. I got myself into this, she said with a slight slur. She sat up, her unkempt white hair falling over her face. Got careless. Even if you were careless, it was still my call to do as we did, and this was against your advice. The fault is mine. I'll have it no other way. She nodded wearily and rubbed her forehead. Listen, Argrave continued. I've been doing some thinking about what you said, about me being unable to trust. He stared off into the distance. If you want, I'll answer some of the questions you have. Annalise ceased rubbing her aching head, stopping to look at Argrave. Much was running through her head. Even unfocused as she was, she could think of 1,000 questions that came to mind. Then, slowly, the image before her started to crystallize. She could see a lot of intense emotion on Argrave's face. His eyes refused to meet hers and jumped from place to place. He was biting his lip rapidly, and his whole face was taut. Beyond that, he fidgeted with his fingers. He was a mess of anxiety and uncertainty. Feeling guilty? She questioned. That's... Argrave started to protest but trailed off. Wholly right, probably not fair to leave you ignorant while you do my bidding. You and Guilliman both risked your life for me, and I can't answer some questions. Not right in my eyes. Annalise stared at him for a time, and then adjusted in the bed. She thought for a long while. Eventually, she stared him in the eyes and said, I won't ask you any questions about yourself anymore. What? Argrave said incredulously. And why not? She fiddled with her hair, braiding it together. I recall, when I was still only a child, I had a small puzzle box. It was a very complex thing, with wooden machinery and gears hidden inside. The objective was. You had to lead. Annalise struggled to find the words. A small stake with a ball at the end through a maze. The goal was to free the stake from the box. It was no larger than my hand. She held her palm out to demonstrate. After failing to solve it for some time, I pulled on the stick hard, and it popped out of the puzzle. She emulated the motion. I had finished the objective. I got the stick out of the puzzle box, but it left me feeling empty inside, and I had broken the mechanisms within. I could never do it again, never do it right. I learned something from that. She nodded contemplatively. I'll wait for you to tell me, she finished. Huh. Argrave leaned back in the chair. You sure you're alright? Didn't hit your head? You're the one with 1,000 questions at all times. She only smiled quietly in response. Argrave shrugged. Alright. I'm a puzzle to be solved, am I? Well, maybe you'll change your tune once you get some food in you. He came to his feet. I'll go get something for you to eat. Get some water. Not so long ago you were doing the same for me. How the tables have turned. Hash. After an additional day of resting per Argrave's insistence, Annalise was all but fully recovered. Argrave had been worried he would contract yet another illness due to his venture in the dank and filthy cave, but no symptoms manifested. Argrave recalled that nature documentaries called ants the cleanest insect, but they were still insects. Argrave had plans for the Amaranthine heart they'd retrieved, but for now, he stored it in a bag wrapped in cloth. Considering its nature, he did not dare store it in the lockbox with the rose gold magic coins or the enchanted jewelry harvested from the ruins guarded by the metal guardians. He was certain the heart would attach itself to them and suck the magic right out. Indeed, the heart was the most efficient way to purge an item of enchantments without side effects. Considering the rest of the journey to Just was on carriage, everyone was prepared to travel. After giving some final directions to the villagers to kill the remaining lily lurkers with poison, Argrave was content to leave. If the villagers could not be bothered to do as he directed them, Argrave could not fight their battle for them, and so Argrave and company departed from the village of White Edge in the early morning. The only resident that was awake early enough to see them off was the old man that had initially greeted their arrival, Bertrand. After innumerable thanks from the man, they left quietly, the two suns illuminating their road with the milky light of dawn. Though Argrave had initially planned to take a detour to a ruin he knew of to retrieve an invaluable spellbook, on account of Annalise's recent troubles, Argrave decided it would be best to first head to Just and secure lodging there. Unlike in Maytooth, Just's Order of the Grey Owl branch had quite a grand library, so it was not too monumental a setback. Once they left the cover of the forest, Argrave leaned out the window to stare out across the landscape. Just was very obvious from a distance. The City of Shadows, some called it. It was both because of the stone used in its construction, a jet black, harsh rock, and the innumerable towers jutting out from the earth. They were tall and foreboding, and few of them had windows. And there is our destination. A lot less pretty than Maytooth, Argrave gave commentary as the carriage rolled steadily down the road. Annalise also looked out the window, and she showed considerably more surprise than Argrave had. So tall, she murmured. How do they stay standing? Enchantments, Argrave explained. They would fall without magic reinforcing each and every brick. And some have fallen, Argrave said regrettably. There are more A-rank wizards in those towers than toes on this carriage, I'd bet. This place is very, very dangerous. Gilliman, he called out the window. You will have to practice extreme discretion with your drinking habit. No need to yell. I hear every word you say, even if you whisper, the vampire shot back, driving the carriage disaffectedly. I've been to Just before. I know these things. Spellcasters must have a reason to make this place their home, Annalise noted, still staring out the window. Magic is denser here. Some natural phenomenon causes it. Which reminds me. Argrave lifted the bottle full of black liquid off the floor. He willed much of his magic to repaying the debt he'd accrued in the Cavern of the Lily's death, then took a swig of the bottle. Are you sure that liquid is safe to drink? Annalise asked, finally turning her head away from the scenery. Very sure. It actually helps me greatly, Argrave noted, holding the bottle up. One's magic capacity was like a muscle. It needed to be used to grow. By depleting it and replenishing it, it would expand to accommodate more magic. By repaying his debt to Erlebnia and then replenishing his magic with the Amaranthine heart's liquid mana, his prowess as a mage would increase far more rapidly than his peers. Argrave swirled the bottle about, watching the black liquid's vortex. Too much of this, though, and boom, no more living. You'll explode in a burst of mana. The burst looks rather neat, I must confess, though I don't care to see it from a first-person perspective. So it isn't safe to drink, Annalise concluded. Argrave paused as he felt the mana resurge in his body. Too much of anything can kill you. You can die drinking water. Will you explode in a burst of water? Touche, Argrave conceded. He looked out the window once more. All right, enough idle talk. We should discuss what we need to do in Just. Annalise nodded. That tax collector at White Edge, you truly believe that was a sign for their intention to join the war? If so, my first worry would be entering the city unnoticed. As a royal bastard, you are a target of interest. Argrave nodded. Entering quietly won't be a problem. I know of some less well-known entryways used by smugglers and such. Indeed, we'll need to make some connections with the smugglers regardless to deliver those illusion spellbooks to the Vadaemon. Argrave looked out the window, searching for the points of entry that he remembered in the distant Black City. I know someone. If I mention a name, I have little doubt he'll do as I request with few questions asked. It's also going to be beneficial to know him. He's the well-connected sort. The castle Prince in Dune gave me is not so far from Just, Argrave remarked cheerily, reminded of it only now. If we're lucky, we might see it fall into the ocean. He spotted Annalise's frown, and quickly added, don't worry, I already sold it. That's how I got all those rose gold magic coins. She crossed her legs. Part of me thinks you like to mention ridiculous things casually to elicit a response. You're the empath here. You tell me, Argrave replied, neither confirming nor denying it. Boss, came a gruff voice. A man hunched over a book laid out across a desk looked up, squinting into the faint darkness beyond. A magic lamp was the sole illuminator of the dank stone room, and the place was mostly bare. The papers spread out across the desk were filled with numbers and descriptions of people. What is it? The man at the desk responded. He had dark red hair, and despite his barren surroundings, was dressed quite well in clothes that matched his hair color. A clean-shaven man with a pockmarked face entered. New client came in for a simple quiet transfer into the city. And you bother me for this? I don't think you're that stupid. The man leaned back in his chair, waving his hands as though to hurry the conversation. He matches the description of the person the bat was looking for. Use the same name, even. Is that right? The man behind the desk leaned back. He mentioned your name, Rivian. Mentioned the bat, too, the man said grimly. Told us that he'd know if anything was missing. Cargo was just books. Most of them were from the Order. There was also a bottle full of some black liquid. No one knew what it was. Rivian frowned, but a smile soon lit his face. A visitor from the night, Rivian mused aloud. After a few seconds of pause, he tapped his finger on the desk. Well, the bat just wanted word of his location, nothing more. Do as this Argrave requested. I'll pass this information along to the bat. Your job is done. Rivian leaned back to his book. Another thing, the other man said. Little Lord Stain came by asking about the same person, plus the people he was traveling with. Seemed to be about a tip he got about some jewels. I got the feeling he wanted to lift them, was looking for help from the rest of the boys. The Little Lord? Rivian asked. This one? Quite the center of attention. Rivian leaned and retrieved a key from his pocket, using it to open up a drawer on the desk. He pulled out a piece of paper marked with the wax seal of a bat in the bottom corner. I see. Royal Bastard of House Vasker. Rivian tapped the paper and then put it back where he'd retrieved it, shutting the drawer and locking it tightly. Tell the men he's off limits. I don't play around with the bat's interests. And tell this Argrave that he's caught the eye of the Little Lord. The man with the pockmarked face nodded. Should I tell him it's the Little Lord Stain, or should I use his real name? Stain, Rivian said decisively. Just tip him off that someone might be trying to rip him off. No need to bring unwanted trouble to the Little Lord. Keep everybody happy. All right, that's all, boss. The man waved his hand and exited. Rivian watched him leave, then licked the tip of his fingers, retrieving a blank piece of paper from one corner of the desk. He picked up a stick that glowed on the edge and started to write across the paper. Instead of ink, a small flame left burnt words on the paper. Chapter 58, Into the Dark Streets. The man masked in a bandana held up a small stone rod, and the lock on the iron gate clicked open. He opened the gate quietly and walked in. Ahead, an overgrown garden waited. Argrave walked through, and Annalise and Gilliman followed shortly behind him. Argrave looked up, seeing several giant black towers looming above. He briefly turned back to the stone tunnel behind them, poorly lit by magic lamps. Welcome to Just, the man said. That wooden token we gave you, hold on to it. You'll need it. Your cargo will be at a house in the southern side of town. Search for the building with the horseshoe hanging from the metal fence. Yes, I know, Argrave interrupted, readjusting his satchel bag where he knew the wooden token was. That's all. Have a pleasant day. Right, the man said conclusively, dragging the iron gate back shut. Don't blame me if you get lost. He looked at Gilliman and Annalise. Keep your elves in line. We won't tolerate their kind if they don't know their place. It's me you should be worried about. Argrave dismissed. If you're smart, you'll walk back into that hole. He waved the man away down the stone tunnel. After a begrudging glare, the man turned away. Argrave looked around the overgrown garden, feeling somewhat nostalgic. The gate finally shut, and he heard the fading noise of boots against stone as their escort returned to the point they'd been taken from. Do most human cities have services like this? Annalise questioned. No, Argrave answered quickly. Just is special. Considering the number of wizards that make their home here, there's a large demand for smuggling services. The Order of the Grey Owl is very strict with their management of the sale of magic goods, but a lot of wizards need a lot of money. Ergo, illegal operations like this abound in this city of magic. I question if we may not have attracted more attention entering the way we did, Gilliman noted. These people. They're the sort that buy and sell information. Well, I know who they work for. Argrave tapped his temple. And it isn't particularly problematic for me if that person knows I'm here. With it, Argrave turned on his heel away from Guilliman. Argrave walked about the garden without purpose, looking around and taking in the sights like he was returning back to a familiar place after years. The birds connected to Argrave via pack leader swooped down, landing on a particularly thick branch. In a big city like this, these birds would be largely useless. So, what are we to do here? Guilliman prompted, stepping up to Argrave. He carried Argrave's lockbox in the crook of his arm, his other hand resting on the handle of his ebony axe. Argrave snapped back to attention, turning back to the two of them. First we get lodging, we get our cargo, and then we put the cargo in said lodging. I won't say the rest here. Doubtless the little syndicate we employed has ears on this place. They already know enough. Argrave turned, gesturing behind for them to follow. So, let's be off. They walked through the overgrown garden, carefully minding the plants and in frequent trouble. Eventually Argrave spotted a familiar overturned mossy gargoyle and a great abandoned mansion. At one time it may have been a palatial estate, but now much of the towering building was crushed beneath giant black bricks and covered in greenery. Argrave walked along the outside of the mansion before they came to a simple stone wall. They followed it until there was a hole in the wall, and then exited discreetly into the alleyways of Just. The buildings were all close-set and made of dark stone, so the scene was quite eerie. Argrave looked back to Guilliman, who nodded as though assuring him. After a quick and tense walk through the alleyways, the din of a great many people moving started to enter Argrave's ears. He could see light up ahead. He moved towards it, and when they passed out of the alleyways, the streets of Just greeted them. Though not as busy as Mateth had been, the place still abounded with innumerable people. Even in midday, Just was a very dark place. The bricked stone road resembled concrete after rain even when completely dry. The sunlight was partially blocked by the many towers standing hundreds of feet above them. It reminded Argrave of big cities with skyscrapers, though the streets were not even a tenth as busy. The towers above were flanked by ordinary, unremarkable buildings created a strange juxtaposition. It was just as Argrave remembered the city. The thought made him want to sigh, but he kept it inside. Annalise was looking around everywhere, her curiosity unrestrained as ever. Argrave grabbed her and Guilliman, bunching them closer together, before conjuring a D-rank ward around them to block the sound. No one looked at them. Strangely, blocking conversations in this manner was a common occurrence in Just. People mostly stared because it was strange to see three people so tall in such close proximity. Now that we're out of that little den of inequity, I can tell you what we're really going to do. We have enough money to buy one of these towers about town, but it's all in rose gold magic coins, a little bit difficult to pay for bread or a bed with what amounts to 2,000 gold coins. Argrave explained. We need smaller denominations. As such, for our first order of business we'll sell some of the jewels, maybe even some of the jewelry from the ruins. Argrave tapped the lockbox in Guilliman's hands. From there, we'll buy some of those circlets you can see people wearing. I mentioned this to you before, Annalise. Look. Argrave pointed to a person in a passing crowd. See that man with the iron band on his forehead? It's a bit difficult to distinguish his features, right? Annalise and Guilliman both looked. A lot of people like to wear those here, Argrave remarked, his head following the man as he walked along. It's a pretty common item, especially on account of the ever-present criminal element. Just a simple illusion enchantment. Annalise and I probably see past the magic much clearer than Guilliman, a non-mage. It's going to be difficult to blend in with people because of our heights, but we can at least disguise from the general public that you're both elven, and that I'm handsome. Both turned back to face him, neither particularly amused by his joke. All right, give me some credit, at least, Argrave said defeatedly. Anyway, from there, I have a great big list that I need to tackle one by one. I've been thinking a lot about that tax collector showing up to Whiteedge. I'd like to figure out what's going on before we prance on over to the burnt desert. If the Duke of Elbril has decided to throw in his lot with the rebels, then it'll be over like that and we'll be on our merry way, Argrave emphasized with a snap. If not, well, this won't be a brief stop. I presume you already have something in mind? Annalise asked. You presume right, Argrave nodded. I need to have a little chat with a man by the alias of Stain. He's a somewhat unpleasant person, and a main character, Argrave dialogued internally. Strong words from you, Guilliman noted. Argrave clicked his tongue. He's quick-witted, I suppose, but he's not someone you'd really trust. He's a rogue, a thief, a swindler, and many other such reprehensible professions. His biggest merit is that he's got a high position in Just. Argrave shrugged. This may be a dead end. As I understand, he's inclined to travel a lot. Argrave had changed Nicoletta's course because he'd directly intervened in what occurred to her before the game even began. Melanie was at Mateth and would likely remain there for some time. For the other 7 main characters, Argrave could not remotely predict what they'd do. At the very least, Argrave knew Stain had reasons to stay near Just. He was one of 3 characters inclined towards rogue-like professions, and Just offered many opportunities for such individuals. This came alongside his local ties to the area. As Argrave was lost in thought, the ward that he'd conjured finally expired, shattering soundlessly into fragments of magic and dissipating into the air. He stared at the magic briefly before tapping his feet against the ground. Shopping. I hate to admit it, but I am feeling strangely excited. It's been such a long time, Some of Argrave's giddiness leaked into his voice and he cleared his throat. Let's be off to a duel as I know of. No delays. So much to do. Hash. Once Argrave sold yet more of the jewels he'd pilfered in the ruins guarded by the metal things, he went to one of the more reputable and well-guarded inns on the northern side of the town. It still made him uncomfortable to leave their lockbox there, considering the fortune it held. Argrave made sure to clean himself thoroughly in their washroom, and he finally managed to feel truly refreshed for the first time after their journey into the Cavern of the Lily's death. There were few opportunities to clean so distant from civilization as they had been, and Argrave made sure to take full advantage of the time he had here. When that was done, Argrave put on his now somewhat worn leather clothing and left the inn with Annalise and Gilliman. Just was quite a confusing place to navigate. The city was level and much of its buildings looked the same, so Argrave mostly relied on the shop signs to remember where he was. After a few misremembered turns, Argrave finally spotted the horseshoe hanging from an iron fence. Just behind the iron fence was a simple little house. It looked abandoned and poorly maintained, even made of stone as it was. The glass windows had been blown out and replaced with wooden boards. Argrave gave the horseshoe a spin as he passed by it, and it jangled noisily against the fence. He opened the fence's gate without any hesitation. You first, Gilliman, Argrave gestured. Not expecting trouble, but don't relax. Gilliman adjusted his axe and shifted the great sword on his hip. I never do. That's unfortunate, Argrave commented as Gilliman walked by. Worrying, even. Everyone has to take some time for themselves. Rich words from your mouth, Annalise noted as she entered after Gilliman. Argrave entered, shutting the gate. If I could afford to, I'd be relaxing every day. I have bigger issues. I'm sure you understand. All too well, she concluded, walking ahead after Gilliman. Argrave followed Annalise to where Gilliman waited at the door to the house. The elf held up 4 gauntleted fingers, and Argrave quickly processed he meant there were 4 people inside. Argrave nodded and gestured for Gilliman to open the door. Gilliman knocked, and in not half a second the door shifted open slightly. A chain stopped it from opening too far. Token, a rough voice said simply, 2 fingers peeking out like a pair of pliers waiting to grasp together. Argrave reached into his satchel bag and pulled free the wooden token, handing it to Gilliman, who passed it on to the doorman. The door shut, and then after a few seconds of locks jangling, opened widely. A man wearing leather armor walked away casually. He was armed, Argrave noted. Gilliman took steady steps forward as he ducked into the house, metal boots clanging out and disturbing the silence. Once they were inside, Argrave shut the door behind them. Looking about, 2 people sat casually by the house's boarded windows, watching the outside. They had crossbows loaded with bolts that shone with enchantments hanging idly in their hands. They did not seem to be particularly wary of Argrave or company, instead focused on the outside. Here are your things, the man called out ahead, drawing Argrave's attention. They walked into what might have been the abandoned house's living room at some point. The man walked up and banged his hands against a wooden crate. He inserted the wooden token into the side of it, and it popped open. He took off the lid and reached in, trying and failing to pull something out. The 4th man in the house walked up, helping the first haul Argrave's chest out of the crate. They set it down loudly, huffing. Heavy stuff. What's in there? Dead animals. Dead people, maybe? Sure, act like you don't know, Argrave commented, kneeling down and popping the lid. He did a brief perusal to ensure nothing was missing, but all seemed intact. The men brought out the bottle of liquid magic next, setting it down. Satisfied? The man inquired. He put the lid back on the crate and jumped up on it, sitting. The other leaned up against it, watching. Indeed, Argrave said conclusively, shutting the chest of books. There's another matter I might employ your little crew for. Is that right? Well, the boss told me to pass on something to you, so let's get that out of the way first. The man sitting atop the crate said. That little lockbox you had your man there carry? Someone's got a bead on its contents. A local thief. Everyone calls him Little Lord Stain. At once, Annalise cast a glance at Argrave. Did he now? Argrave said with some pleasure apparent on his tone. And what does he believe is in my lockbox? Jewels, apparently, the man said with a shrug. The boss thought you should know. He's told the men to lay off, but Stain isn't with our crew, so he might do something stupid. Just a friendly warning from your neighborhood heroes, the man concluded, spreading his arms wide with a grin. Now, what's this business you wanted with us? Argrave let a silence take the room for a moment as he ran down the series of events that led to this. The tax collector had to report about an anomaly in the tax collection process. Little Lord Stain, well connected to the bureaucracy as he is, heard about my payment in jewels. He'd be drawn to this, naturally. Funny coincidence, this. My business was with him. Have any idea where I might find him? A general direction? Argrave pointed with his fingers. You know him? The man asked, raising a brow. Argrave did not answer, and so the man continued. As to where he lives? Well, the boss wouldn't be fond of me running my mouth. I can't help with this business of yours. I've learnt enough, Argrave said with a smile. Gilliman, grab the chest and let's be off. It's been a pleasure, gentlemen. Chapter 59, Stain. A man walked down the streets of Just with his head hung low, brown hair covering much of his face. Rather than sad or dejected, He seemed to be lost in thought. He wore somewhat rugged clothing that matched very well with the color of the buildings throughout the city, enough so that it might be impossible to see him at all in the dark. It wasn't that I couldn't swing it. All of them were ready and eager when I told them about the score, but they changed their tune in hours. Stein considered. This guy probably had some ties with the Order here. Maybe he's a key man between the wizards and the crews. Would explain why he had jewels. Might explain why he was at White Edge. Might be a warehouse. Stein lifted his head slightly, scanning the crowd ahead. At this point in his life, he'd become very adept at spotting wealth on people. Rings on fingers, jewelry, where they might keep their gold. It was a skill that needed to be honed, just as one had to learn how to take it from them. No luck today. Waste of time. He concluded about the passers-by. His mind wandered back to the mark he'd been considering. Maybe I should go to White Edge, scout things out. It's clear that the man didn't want the tax collector going into the village. There had to be a reason for that. Might be worth much more than jewels when all is said and done. After stopping and looking to be sure none were following him, Stein turned into an alleyway. He walked quickly, taking winding turns with complete confidence, before coming to a run-down portion of Jast. Some of the finely paved street had caved in here. This place had once been a cistern, before the Order had made a more easily accessible place for the people to fetch water. Stein walked down into the caved-in portion, scrambling over loosely packed rubble. He ducked into a portion that was large enough for him to fit, and then stared out at the underground cistern. The water level had lowered over the years without management, but it was still relatively full. Stein sat, removing his boots and socks. The dagger he'd hidden in his footwear dropped out, and he caught it. After rolling up his pants, Stein entered the water, disturbing the still underground lake. Holding his dagger and boots above the water, he headed for a faint light on a distant wall. Once he reached it, he climbed up onto a raised alcove just before a simple makeshift door. He looked around a bit. Looks like one of the lamps broke again, Stein noted, setting his footwear and dagger aside. Cheap junk. He turned and sat on the alcove, waiting for his feet to dry before placing his socks on. He watched the ripples he'd made spread across the cistern's water. Without warning, something cold touched Stein's throat, and he heard a single footstep beside him. His breathing stopped, and he turned his eyes to see a giant of a man holding a great sword down to his neck. His features were muddled, and Stein saw an iron band on his forehead, a circlet of disguise. Stand up, enter the door. Test me, you lose fingers, the man said, his voice low and gravelly. Stein swallowed, looking between his dagger and the cistern, judging loosely if he still had time to jump in. Getting cut once should be worth it. I can lose him in the water. He's wearing plate mail. My feet are wet. I don't want to walk barefooted, and I don't want to put my socks on when they're still wet. Stein spoke nonsense to stall for time. Stein did not have time to react as the man's foot struck his chest, sending him sprawling back away from the water. He coughed, winded, and gazed up weakly. He heard the door open. Gilliman, the voice said, somewhat annoyed. I told you not to be too mean. You also told me he was shifty beyond measure, the man called Gilliman retorted. He was looking for a way to run. Seen it before. The other voice sighed. Stein tried to crane his head to look, but suddenly a foot pressed down on his chest. The one called Gilliman stared down at Stein, features indistinguishable because of the circlet he wore. Stop it. Don't make it worse, the other said urgently. Just bring him inside. Hash. Gilliman tossed Stein against the wall, and the man slowly slid down until he was sitting. Gilliman kept the greatsword in hand, but he no longer pointed it at Stein's neck. Stein looked young. He was 16, Argrave knew. Argrave sat in a chair, watching this all happen somewhat apathetically. He looked around, spotting where Annalise was idly reading through the various pieces of paper on a desk. She wore a circlet of disguise just as Gilliman did. They had purchased them on their way here. There was a busted lever in one corner, and a collapsed stairwell on the opposite edge of the room. There was also a badly worn and poorly constructed bed. Argrave recalled this place well. It was Stein's little hideout in the game. This is where you live? Questioned Argrave. I can understand the people that want to live humbly despite their wealth, but this is just filthy. I hate it here. Stein caught his breath, slowly correcting his posture until he was upright. His gaze flitted between Argrave and Gilliman. The whole point of being a thief or a swindler is to make money. What's the point if you're living in a place like this? Argrave asked further. Just don't get it. Stein raised a finger slowly. You're the guy there. The wizard from White Edge. 7 feet tall, black hair, elven companions. That's you. Yes, I think I am the guy, Argrave confirmed. He had his own circlet of disguise just as his 2 companions, but he elected not to wear it at this moment. Listen, Stein said insistently. Everybody else started to back off from the plan. I'm smart enough to get that message. I stopped planning to search for those jewels. That's nice, Argrave nodded. You want me to stop sticking my nose in? I get it. Stein raised his hands as if surrendering. You'll never see me again. I'll stay out of your way. No need for this. Argrave leaned forward, placing his elbows on his knees and clasping his hands together. I'm here because of your other name, Validrin of Jast. Now, with a last name like Jast, one might think you have some ties to the lovely little city. Once Argrave said that, Stein paused, taking a deep breath and exhaling. He chose his next words very carefully. Look, I understand that you might have some business going on in Whiteedge. Maybe it's got something to do with the Vadaemon. I know they have some operations here, and I remember that tax collector mentioning you were traveling with 2 elves, he said, gesturing to Annalise. You might be thinking that, because I'm Count Delbrun's brother, I might sell you out, get the Count's eye on your business. That is not the case, Stain said insistently. That's not my business, not my nature. I've got the mouth on a statue, pal. Argrave listened curiously. Evidently Stain was trying to save his life, though Argrave had no intention to kill him. Count Delbrun hates me, Stain said. The reason why I took the name Stain is because he called me a stain on Just's honor. Stain chuckled nervously. That's a true fact. You ask anyone high up in the Riveters. It's common knowledge. Riveters. That's the name of the smuggler group, I presume, Argrave questioned. Aye, Rivian's crew. Stain nodded. I live in this charming little lakeside house because I refuse to accept any of my brother's money. He'd let me live in his gilded palace, I'm certain, but he and I are not close at all. He doesn't care if I live or die. I am not worth your time, I assure you. Argrave leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms. But you're still a little entrenched in that side of things. How would you learn about the tax collector if you didn't have some connection to the Count? The Count received the taxes, after all. You had to learn about the jewels from him or his people. Stain started breathing a bit faster. I saw the tax collector's report in Delbrun's estate, and I spoke to him, but everything else I said was true. Stain pointed his finger to emphasize the point. Just ask around. You'll find the truth. So you can get into his estate. Did you sneak in? And be honest, Argrave cautioned. Aye. Stain trailed off, brain scrambling. No. I still have access. Delbrun lets me in, mostly on account of my other siblings there. I check his documents sometime to find things that I might get some people on, skim a little off the top. Well, that's peachy. Precisely what I need. Argrave clapped his hands together, the sound muffled by his gloves. Here's the thing. You like money, Argrave pointed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pink coin. I have a great deal of it. Would you like some? Stain sat there, mouth agape with his eyes locked on the rose gold magic coin. He was quick-witted enough to gather himself and respond. I wouldn't say no. That's good. But I'm not a philanthropist. Argrave nodded and stowed the coin away. Here's the thing. I have the sneaking suspicion that the Duke of Elbrail, Count Delbrun's liege, is preparing for war. I need to confirm that suspicion and get all the juicy details about who he intends to support in the civil war. You catch where this is heading? Stain's eyes jumped about as he digested what Argrave had said. Seeing that the 3 of them were not, in fact, here to kill him, Stain adjusted his posture. You want me to get some correspondence between the Duke and my brother showing if he has any orders from up high? Stain laid out, and Argrave nodded. I can tell you what I know already. Delbrun planned to remain neutral, but lately, Just has been quietly gathering troops. A lot of the wizards loyal to the Count have already been told not to go anywhere as their services might be needed very shortly, so they are going to choose a side in the war, Argrave noted. Aye, right I guess. Stain nodded slowly. But nothing's going to happen for a while. Winter's coming. No one wants to war during winter, not even with magic. I need more than that, Argrave declared plainly. If this is happening quietly, the Count doesn't want people learning of which side he intends to support until it's too late. I need to know if he's going to fight for the rebels or the tyrants. All right, Stain nodded. And the pay? Annalise, give him the down payment, Argrave said. She stepped forward and handed a sack of coins to Stain. He took them, unraveling the string and counting. He closed it, a dissatisfied expression on his face. Did you sell some of those jewels to get this? He asked. I did, Argrave confirmed. I could have got you a premium price. Big mistake, he said remorsefully. Argrave chuckled. I know my business. Got nearly 3,000 for a few sapphires. He saw Stain try and hide the fact that he was impressed, and Argrave stood with a grin. You do well. Might be I'll hand you a rose gold magic coin. Get me everything you can, Valedrian. And don't think of running with that paltry purse. If I could find this place, anywhere else will be twice as easy. Argrave tapped his temple and ducked through the door. See you soon. How will I get the info to you? Stain called out. I'll be back in a week or so. Might be here, might be anywhere. Just keep watch. Argrave waved behind him and finished. If you have something urgent, talk to Rivian. He can probably find me. Stain let out a long sigh as the door shut. He stood and fell back into his bed. 1,000 curses were running through his head. He had not been expecting his day to be like this. Damned scary bastard. He was running everything through his head, trying to figure out how the man could find him here. No one knew of this place, none that he knew of. At least, this place had always been his sanctuary. He felt safe here. Yet that man had found his sanctuary a mere day after Stain had asked a few questions about him. Guess this is the difference between the big fish and the little fish. If they're asking about the Civil War, they've got to be working for a major player, out of town, even. Stain held the bag full of gold coins in the air, moving it about with his fingers. I do this right and I earn a lot. I catch the eye of someone high up. Might be this becomes a regular thing. Stain sat up, looking around what he once called his sanctuary. This is just filthy. The man's words echoed in his head. Stain clenched the gold bag a little tighter and muttered, "Better get started, then." Chapter 60, Profligate. Argrave neatly placed a single piece of paper atop the table in the center of Erin's room. They had rented a rather large room with 6 beds intended as a dormitory. It had been more expensive, but Argrave thought it would be best if they slept near each other, and no one protested to the idea. He might have found another abandoned house as he had in Maytooth, but most abandoned places in Just had some ties to smugglers or criminals. Glimmer handed Argrave a small metal rod with inscriptions across its length. Argrave took off his gloves and grasped it. Its tip glowed hot, and Argrave touched it to his skin briefly. It was quite hot. Such an interesting tool. Create burn marks in the paper instead of using ink, he mused, tapping his finger against its tip again and again. I digress. We have a lot of things to pick up. Argrave pointed his new writing utensil at Gilliman and Annalise, who both stood beside the table. I'm going to write most of it down. Come, let's sit. Argrave gestured to the chairs and sat in one himself. Let me cast a ward blocker off anyone who might be listening. Argrave provided commentary as he did just that. All right. Argrave began, voice echoing in the spell of his making. So, first, there's the urgent matters. We have to go to the Just branch of the Order of the Grey Owl to retrieve the shipment of illusion spellbooks for the Vadaman. Considering how long we were at White Edge, they should be here by now. At least I hope. Argrave shrugged, writing that first item down. While there, we can finally pick up some of the books I need there. We'll be swimming in C-rank spells, you and I, he said grandly, grabbing Annalise's arm. We can also learn if they decided to accept you into the Order. If fate is unduly kind, you'll be given full membership. If fate is passably kind, you'll be given honorary membership, not unheard of for elves, and it suits our purposes. If they refuse you outright, well, I'll have to teach you spells illegally. Annalise seemed a bit taken aback by this, but Argrave did not give her the time to say anything further. After, we're going to be replacing our wardrobe. Just as passable craftsmen but an abundance of enchanters. That said, there's one world-renowned shop here that tailor-makes enchanted leather gear. For a high price, we can get it out of a special material, mantic or leather, the like. This is what I'll be purchasing for us, Annalise. I think 2 sets should be sufficient. 1 for each. Very generous. Annalise nodded and smiled. No. Argrave shook his head. 2 sets for each. I'll not walk around without changing clothes for months, nor would I subject a companion to the same fate. Besides, they're sure to be damaged protecting us. Argrave tapped his finger against the desk, thinking. If I remember right, the price should be altogether no more than 80,000 gold, depending on the material. I think I'll offer 40 rose gold magic coins outright. I'm sure I can swing that. Hold, Annalise said quickly. One could buy much in Vaiden with that. Even some chiefs of great tribes would never see that much money in their life, before or after Dra's conquest. Is gold less valued on this continent? Argrave opened his mouth to answer, but Gilliman took her off his helmet and placed it on the table, then set his elbows down loudly. Gold is likely more valuable here, he said, voice quiet. A sizable family could eat for a day off 10 or so gold coins, from what I have seen in my travels. Annalise looked at Argrave with her eyes wide. Argrave gave a nod of confirmation and went to the paper. So, 40 rose gold magic coins from our 164 brings us to 124, or... Argrave paused, doing the math. 248,000, give or take a little. The conversion rate isn't 2,000 per coin exactly, but it's close. Wait, she urged. Can we be so flippant with money? You do not need to purchase so much whimsically. I would not feel disparaged were you to buy less for me. And why would I do that? Argrave responded in confusion. All of you need to be as well equipped as I am, if not more. Annalise sat there with mouth agape, and Argrave shook his head and went back to his task. After, we'll need some enchanted jewelry. Metal holds magic better, as do gemstones, but well-enchanted jewelry is ridiculously expensive. The craftsman has to be able to make a ring to very precise specifications after the initial casting. It takes a jeweler knowledgeable in extremely complex enchantments. As you might imagine, such a person is not exactly common, and so they are quite expensive. Argrave pointed to Annalise and himself. For us 2 wizards, I say 1 ring each. For Gilliman, you can regenerate, and rings will be cumbersome anyway. Argrave wrote that down. Even with our enchanted leather armor, it would be best not to grow reliant on it. The enchantment should be for protection. I'm thinking a B-rank warding spell at least. I think I'm willing to pay, at most, 30,000 for both of these rings. Argrave scribbled the figure down, and Annalise shook her head disbelievingly. But now Gilliman is feeling neglected. Argrave continued. Since Barden, you've been walking about with a hole in your armor's torso. I'm sure you'll be pleased to know you'll be getting new armor. I can't afford to have someone else enchant it, but I'd like to have this set repaired, Gilliman interrupted. I've done it before and I can work with a smith. With 2 smiths, it would still take around 2 weeks, though, he cautioned. Don't like human forging styles. Argrave questioned jokingly. Well, sure. I'm not sure if that can be done, but we'll see. Next order of business. There's that crown you took from the ruins a long while ago. Glimmer nodded. Will we sell it? No, that's ridiculous, Argrave admonished. It's an artifact. It uses magic that can't be replicated anymore. You'd be wearing it right now if it wouldn't be odd to walk around with a crown on your head in the city streets. Argrave pointed at Gilliman. We'll have armor forged around it. Shouldn't be too difficult. You do recall how much stronger it made you, right? I do, Gilliman nodded. But protecting the head is too important to use it actively. That's why we remake it into a helmet. Argrave spun his writing utensil in his hand. If it's just smithing the armor, I suspect it may not even enter a 5-digit figure. Spellcasters overvalue their services. Go figure, Argrave said musingly. I'll mark another 10,000 for your armor and helmet to be on the safe side for budgeting. So, 208,000 remaining. Time for the real money sinks, Argrave said with a smile. They both looked overwhelmed. Gilliman, put your metal weapons and your bow on the table. After glancing about, Gilliman stood and grabbed his great sword from the corner of the room. He pulled his dagger from its sheath, and lastly grabbed his bow. Do you like all of these? Argrave questioned as the elf set all of what he'd retrieved down on the table. After decades of trial and error, these work best, he said simply. I see that. Argrave reached forward. The dagger was simple, merely a straight guard and a simple blade, unadorned. The great sword was not so. It resembled most a Kriegsmesser with the blade curving at the end. Argrave touched the sword. Very nice. Did you get this in the north? I don't think they make weapons like these in the south. Gilliman raised a brow. Yes, it was the north. You know weapons? No, Argrave dismissed. I like them, and I know the styles particular to each region, but beyond that I have no damned clue. Argrave thumped his finger against it, and it rung out. I'll get them made to these specifications. For the great sword, we'll get powerful offensive wind magic. It'll make cuts easier, shear through armor as though it were wheat. You can use it at range. It'll also reduce the damage your blade takes. Less contact. Very prudent for a long journey, Gilliman noted. Precisely, Argrave pointed to Gilliman with his writing utensil. Repairing enchanted stuff is expensive. Other enchantments might be more potent, but they need constant maintenance. So, for a good enchanted great sword. Argrave tried to think back to prices in the game. My ceiling is probably 75,000. There was a palpable discomfort in the room after Argrave spoke the figure. Argrave leaned forward and laid it out. We're getting top-end stuff here. I suspect this'll be better quality than the Royal Guard's weapons. This is equipment that'll carry us for years. They need a smith that can make the inscriptions for enchantments without compromising the integrity of the blade. A mage and a smith in one. Argrave leaned back in his chair, feeling his point was made. That kind of expertise is costly. Don't balk at the price. It is merely difficult to process. You would spend so much for equipment not intended for yourself, Annalise finally said. Oh. Argrave nodded, finally seeing things clearly. If I wanted money, I could make money. It would take time, that's all. In fact, I'll probably do a lot of money making when this great big journey is all over, provided I don't die terribly during it. For now, I trust two things. I trust you, he said, grabbing their arms with each hand, and I trust that you both know the consequence of failure. Both of them grew serious when Argrave said that. He tapped their arms and leaned back. If you die because I was stingy, it would be immeasurably saddening. My success would also be much more far-fetched. So, you'll take what I give you, I hope, he concluded, grinning. Gilliman crossed his arms and gave a single nod, and Annalise eventually conceded too. He deducted 75,000 from the paper. Wonderful. Now then, this bow. Argrave picked it up. We'll hold off getting a new one. I'd rather get one from the elves in the Midwest part of Vaska. They have some pact with the Dryads, can get dryad wood. Well, not important yet. Argrave waved his hand and shook his head. And the dagger? Gilliman prompted. Argrave picked up the blade in question. Probably a fire enchantment that packs a lot of punch. I'm told burning your enemies from the inside is very potent. It'll be temporary, and probably cost about 20,000. Argrave wrote that number down on the paper. Temporary? Gilliman repeated. Argrave crossed his legs and leaned back. I have a set of daggers that you're going to get eventually, but they're not the sort of thing you can buy in stores. They're near House Parbon's Lionsome Castle. I don't use multiple daggers. Not yet, Argrave said simply. When you see them, you'll change your tune. You won't be using them all the time, either, but instead just when we're fighting. Giant things, Argrave concluded broadly. Giant things, repeated Annalise incredulously. Yes, giant things, Argrave nodded. I told you genuine monsters were going to appear, though there's no shortage of giant things already in this world. The Erectic Kit is the final test, but he's got plenty coming before. We're talking things that make your dragon back in Veiden, Crystal Wind, seem small. Argrave did not give them time to digest his words. I think this is the last thing. Now, those Ebonice daggers that Driz gave me as a gift, I'm going to reforge a great deal of them into arrows. Argrave pointed to the elven vampire. You'll have to do this bit, Gilliman. I don't trust any of the people in this city with their Ebonice, as they don't work with it. Gilliman nodded. We've done it before back in Mateth. Should be no problem. Good, Argrave nodded. We'll also commission some enchanted arrowheads. I'm thinking Whatever brings us down to 50 rose gold magic coins flat. With that, we'll have a generous leeway in this budget. The rest of the money I need for my plan with the Amaranthine heart, appraising the jewelry we got from the tomb, future purchases, and rainy days. Argrave wrote that final bit down and tossed down the writing utensil, stretching. Annalise and Guillermin both sat in silence, and the ward blocking their sound finally broke. Annalise pursed her lips, then hesitantly opened her mouth. I don't think I realized how much money you had. Guillermin nodded, and another long period of silence stretched out. Guillermin tapped his helmet and said, I regret agreeing to this for only 3,000 gold. I was poor then. Argrave shook his head. You had nearly 7,000 gold, Guillermin said. Exactly, Argrave nodded. That was barely enough for one of these items. That. Guillermin trailed off, and then shook his head. If you like this audiobook, subscribe the channel for more videos like this. And join my Patreon if you want to support me, where you can find the complete collection Jackal Among Snakes audiobooks. Hurry up, what are you waiting for? Leave some comment and let me know if you guys like this story, or you have a web novel you like and want to hear its audiobook. I will be happy to create them for you. Please like, share, and leave a comment on the video.